Chapter 260, Reinforcements, Part 4 Island. For 2 relentless days and nights, Nathan dueled the fearsome beast pirate Captain Kaido in a battle that shook the very shoreline. Word of their clash had broken out yesterday. Morgan's, that shadowy underground news syndicate, had dispatched a terse telegram. It wasn't an official bulletin, but whispered rumor, traded in the dark alleys of the pirate underworld. Still, every faction had caught wind of the spectacle, especially crews loyal to Kaido. Yet none dared make for Koduka Island. This wasn't a sideshow you could arrive late to watch. 2 days had slipped by. Even the fastest vessels from neighboring isles would only reach after the decisive blow had fallen. Morgan's, ever the opportunist, held an iron grip on the first-hand dispatches and had already minted a small fortune selling updates to eager listeners. From deckhands to captains, many hungered for every scrap of information on the Ghost Hand versus Beast Pirates showdown. Beyond the pirate network, the world government and navy also secured their briefing on Koduka. And how did they get it so swiftly? The answer was mercifully simple. Covert listeners embedded near the island relayed every coded message Morgan sent. So by the time midday came, both sides of the law knew the full scale of the carnage unfolding out at sea, and each prepared to tip the balance with their own reinforcements. Most of the sky above Koduka was black with world government newsbirds, each one bristling with video bugs. From up close, the images sometimes blurred, but they still managed to relay the island's chaos back to naval headquarters, which had already gone to full combat readiness, ready to dispatch warships at a moment's notice. Boom, boom. On the ground, Nathan and the beast Kaido traded titanic blows, leveling hamlets, splintering trees, and sending tremors through the earth. The island lay in ruins. There was scarcely a single structure left standing. Even the native creatures, forced spectators to the clash between the Ghost Hand pirates and the 100 beast pirates, could do little more than scatter in terror. Some of those beasts were incredibly powerful in their own right, but none could match the raw might of Shiryu of the Rain and the 3 Calamities. For Nathan and Kaido, the battle was still raging. But for Shiryu of the Rain, this was already a second confrontation, and this time, the 100 beast pirates' overwhelming numbers were beginning to tell. A warrior like Shiryu, or even master tacticians like Robin and Lafitte, could hold their own in a one-on-one duel. Yet they found it nearly impossible to counter an endless wave of foes. Amid the dust and falling rubble, Nathan braced himself. He knew that if he could hold out just a little longer, if he could keep the beast Kaido pinned down, reinforcements might break through. With every fiber of his strength, he threw himself back into the fray, determined to protect his friends and turn the tide of this furious battle. As soon as Robin and the others were subdued, the beast pirates' bounties jumped by 340 million, and that elevation in rank gave Kaido's finest the right to join the fight against the 3 disasters themselves. Layer by layer, their influence would press down on the remaining defenders and eventually tip the balance of this war. The Ghost Hand pirates, deployed farther back, were already struggling against the storm of enemies pouring in. Yet, even with this new authority, the beast pirates found themselves unable to break Shiryu of the Rain and his squad quickly enough to rush aid to Kaido or to entrap Nathan. To take part directly in the clash between Rhodes and Kaido required power on the level of the 3 disasters. Any lesser force would be cut down almost the moment it stepped into the open, and even the 3 disasters themselves would find it nearly impossible to extricate themselves from that brutal front line. In the end, the beast pirates' bravado faltered. They still weren't ready to commit. Meanwhile, Nathan pressed his tag against Kaido, but he couldn't completely ignore the distant cries of Shiryu and his companions. A tight knot of worry formed in his chest as he watched them lose ground, and he couldn't help but murmur under his breath, "They're in real trouble." The Ghost Hand pirates, with the full might of their mid- and lower-tier fighters, would already command the field. Unless someone of Shiryu of the Rain's caliber appeared to tip the scales, they held the clear advantage, and a second hero of equal strength could sweep away every drawback in an instant. Boom. Nathan's attention was fixed on Shiryu's duel when Kaido the Beast's massive fist slammed into him without warning. The impact sent him hurtling backward through a thicket of towering trees, trunks splintered and shattered as he skidded to a halt. Kaido loomed over him, fury in his eyes. "You're distracted," Kaido growled. "Keep your eyes where they belong." Annoyed by Nethin's divided focus, the beast roared and drove his colossal fist into the earth. The ground exploded outward, fissures tearing open like a yawning abyss that split the battlefield and raced straight toward Nethin. With a grunt, Nethin leapt clear of the collapsing earth, landing nimbly on the opposite edge of the chasm. Both fighters panted, their reserves nearly spent. In that tense moment, Nethin knew the 2 and 3 disasters hovered just beyond, vulnerable, exhausted. If he struck now, he could finish them. But Kaido would never stand idle while his quarry was slaughtered. As the chasm's edges trembled between them, Nethin braced himself. Energy flickered in his limbs, and he weighed his next move. The victor would claim not only the field, but the fates of every soul caught in this war. The 3 calamities and Rain Shiryu himself had failed to halt Kaido's advance, and that, more than anything, was the true might of a 4-emperor. Were it not for their fearsome reputations, men like Huang Yuan would storm into their waters every day, fling the Qionggoyu 8 feet through the air, and walk away scot-free. Deterrence, after all, only works when your enemies believe you can, and will, strike back. Right now, our sole advantage lay in the fact that Geertz had yet to unleash her gift. Her healing fruit didn't just knit flesh and bone, it could partially restore stamina when someone's reserves ran dry, letting a warrior surge back to peak fighting form almost instantly. That power alone could turn the tide, but once Geertz was forced to use it, it would mean both sides would suffer grievous losses. Twisted Fist! Nethin roared as he sidestepped Kaido's sweeping blow and darted behind the giant. Coiling his arm, he drove a punch straight into Kaido's back. The beast pirate spun, catching Nethin's fist with a massive backhand. Their blows met in a thunderous clash that blew Nethin 10 meters across the deck. Even Kaido staggered 2 paces from the impact. Neither man yielded. Nethin squared up, determined to settle this duel before Rain Shiryu and our allies fell to pieces elsewhere on the battlefield. But before he could press the attack, the lookout's cry rang out from the crow's nest. Ships on the horizon. Beast pirates' reinforcements, bearing down on Kido-Duka Island. Reinforcements had arrived, and the war was far from over. Chapter X. Nethin hovered among the swaying treetops, moonlight gleaming off the blood and sweat smeared across his armor. He could feel it in his bones. Kaido's forces would pay dearly for underestimating him. Though the warlord had yet to unleash his full strength, the beast pirates here on Koduka Island, a wooded outpost on the edge of the beast domain, held the upper hand. 2 days and 2 nights of relentless fighting had left Nethin's crew battered and bloodied. Wave after wave of beast pirates had pressed them back, and every inch of ground had been carved out in fire and steel. Still, Nethin's men refused to yield. They owed their lives to their captain's unbreakable resolve, and to the ancient power slumbering within his devil gear. High, above the shoreline, Shiryu Rainwalker floated on an invisible current of air. A thin line of blood trailed from one corner of his mouth, and his golden eyes gleamed with feral anticipation. Below him, the flagship of the 100 beast pirates slid into the cove. Scores of fresh warriors crowded its decks, none of them lieutenants at Kaido's level, but many bore bounties in the 100 to 200 million berry range. Nethin's heart tightened. From the start, the odds had been against them. Now, with reinforcements landing by the dozen, the situation threatened to collapse into disaster. He turned his gaze to the dense forest behind him. His crew, crammed tight in makeshift earthworks, waited on his command. "Everyone, prepare yourselves," he called, voice low but steady. He slid his hand to the hilt of his blade, feeling the familiar hum of gears, the ancient spirit bound to his weapon, stir at his touch. "Once they come ashore, it'll be all or nothing. Gears, give me everything you've got." A deep rumble shook the air as the devil gear awakened. Nethin inhaled, bracing for the storm to come. The night on Koduka Island had reached its crucible, and it would be decided by his blade, his crew's courage, and the unbreakable bond between man and devil. Nethin, master of the Shiryu of the Rain, felt the surge of power coursing through his veins. He knew that with the Rain's blade he could cut down a trio of disasters in a single fierce onslaught. But once he struck them down, escape would be all but impossible. Death stalked him as surely as any opponent. To make matters worse, the distant cries of beast pirate reinforcements drifted on the wind. He squared his shoulders and drew a slow, steady breath, then, in an instant, made his choice. Every last particle of twisting power rippled through his limbs as he locked eyes with Kaido, the gargantuan beast known for his unbreakable ferocity. Kaido, too, seemed to sense the shift. He bared his teeth in a snarl that was more challenge than fear, then lunged toward Nethan with overwhelming force. The impact rattled the sky. Nethan met Kaido head-on, channeling the Shiryu of the rain to its absolute limit. He didn't reach for his signature instant sky slash. There would be time enough for that later. For now, he poured every ounce of his remaining power into the point where they met, determined to carve out a sliver of victory, however fleeting, against the beast pirate's might. Chapter 261, Victory and Loss, Part 5. Nethan unleashed a whirlwind of attacks, sword slashes, hammer strikes, rending spatial distortions, sudden teleportation, each move flowing into the next with near-perfect precision. In his heightened spiritual state, he left no opening for Kaido. After dozens of brutal exchanges, Nethan finally cracked his opponent's rhythm. Boom, boom, boom. Kaido managed to knock the demon knife Muramura from Nethan's hand, but instead of reaching for it, Nethan surged forward, his fist a blurred cannonball aimed straight at Kaido's chest. Under this relentless storm of blows, Kaido had no time to counterattack. He could only parry desperately and skid backward across the scorched earth. Every strike from Nethan was pure, warped force, each precise blow targeted to exploit Kaido's defenses. With a final, thunderous punch, Nethan sent Kaido sprawling through the air. Before his adversary could recover, Nethan bellowed, drawing on the last reserves of his twisted power. In a single devastating leap, he closed the distance and caught Kaido mid-flip, determined to end the duel once and for all. Kaido found himself completely on the defensive. He poured every ounce of his armament haki into his body, turning his skin a deep obsidian black. He hunched forward, arms crossed tightly before his chest, bracing for what was coming. But Nethan pressed the attack without mercy. One punch, two punches, three, each strike thundered against Kaido's hardened form like iron on stone. By the ninth blow, fine cracks began to spiderweb across the haki coating. Then came the 10th and final punch. Nethan gathered all his strength into that single fist, his aura flaring with devastating power. His punch slammed into Kaido's chest with a bone-rattling crack. The ebony armor shattered under the impact, and Kaido cried out, spraying blood from his lips. His body arched backward like a broken toy, then rocketed through the air. Trees snapped, boulders exploded, and nothing could slow his flight as he careened across the landscape. On the field where Shiryu of the Rain's forces were deployed, soldiers looked up in stunned silence. Their shock turned to horror as Kaido hurtled toward them. In an instant, they dove aside to avoid being crushed by the out-of-control warrior slamming into their midst. Nethan's blow landed without warning. In a single, thunderous strike, his famed ghost hand, he shattered Kaido's balance and sent the beast pirate shogun spinning skyward like a rag doll. Below him, even the most battle-hardened pirates, each with bounties north of 100 million, were helpless. Their bodies crumpled beneath the shockwave as if struck by a runaway freight train, bones snapping and cracking in an instant. "Master Kaido!" gasped the onlookers. From every corner of the island, members of the beast pirates froze in stunned disbelief. They'd all seen Kaido's raw power more times than they could count, and never had he been so thoroughly upended. High above, Kaido careened past the jagged cliffs, limbs flailing, until he plowed straight into one of his own warships. Wood and iron splintered in a deafening crash. The colossal vessel tore apart like paper, sending splinters and broken beams raining down before Kaido finally lost all forward momentum and plunged into the sea. For a long, breathless moment, there was only silence. Then came the whispers of panic. The Calamities and the other top officers stared at the roiling waves where their lord had vanished. Kaido, beaten, defeated, by Ghost Hand. "No one of them murmured in horror, no one but Whitebeard could have done this. All around, disbelief turned to dread. If Nethan, this fledgling upstart they'd scarcely taken seriously, had managed to fell the mightiest creature in the world, What hope did any of them have left? The 100 beast pirates, who had seemed to be gaining the upper hand, suddenly broke off their attack. Sensing their hesitation, Shellyu of the Rain and the others seized the moment and redoubled their efforts. Caught off Gua, RD, several of the pirates' mid-level officers, each carrying bounties between 200 and 300 million, fell in quick succession to the Allied assault. "Retreat! Fall back!" the beast pirates bellowed, scrambling to put distance between themselves and their pursuers. Shellyu of the Rain, Robin, the Fishman, Trafalgar Law, Lafitte, and the rest gave chase for a short while, before finally coming to a panting halt. Their chests heaved with exhaustion. Blood and sweat matted their clothes and hair. Robin's body was crisscrossed with cuts and bruises. The Fishman wiped a sheen of sweat from his brow, revealing a deep, bloody claw mark across his back. Bones might even be broken. Law leaned against his sword, breathing raggedly as he pressed a hand to his abdomen. The gash in his side was grievous. Lafitte was in marginally better shape, but dark stains of blood dotted his coat. They all stared in the direction the pirates had disappeared. After a moment of tense silence, Lafitte broke it. "Where's the captain?" Nathan launched Kaido flying across the battlefield, then slammed into a newly arrived beast pirate's ship, yet there was still no sign of Rhodes. Robin's eyes flickered with alarm. "Gertz!" Gertz didn't hesitate. He scattered a handful of healing dandelion seeds over Fisherman Tiger and the others, easing their wounds, then dashed off in the direction Kaido had fallen. After sprinting over 1,000 meters, Gertz and Robin reached a ruined stretch of deck, and there they found Nethan. Nethan leaned against a shattered mast, clutching the demon knife Murai he'd just claimed. His chest rose and fell in ragged gasps. A smear of dried blood stained the corner of his mouth. "Captain!" Gertz called, rushing forward. Nathan lifted a hand in a weary wave. "I'm fine, just completely drained. What about Kaido? Has he gotten back up?" After blasting Kaido away, Nethan's own stamina and haki were utterly spent. He hadn't even the strength left to sense whether Kaido was stirring. Relief washed over Robin's face as he answered. "He crashed into a ship, went under the waves, and he hasn't resurfaced." Nathan's breathing grew shallow, then faltered entirely. Before anyone could react, Geert stepped forward. He folded his hands, and from somewhere within his chest, a gentle, luminescent glow blossomed. The light surged outward, bathing Nethan in a warm, soothing aura, the unmistakable power of the healing fruit. Under that soft radiance, Nethan felt a cooling wave sweep through his battered body. Pain eased, and torn flesh knitted itself back together. Slowly but surely, he regained enough strength to draw in a full breath. Geertz's gift, however, was not limitless. The healing fruit could only mend wounds and restore vigor up to a point before its magic dissipated. When the glow finally dimmed, Geertz's voice cut through the hush. "How do you feel?" Nethan flexed his fingers and exhaled. "Better," he replied, offering a tired but genuine smile. Geertz inclined his head, then turned his gaze toward the retreating figures of the beast pirates. Across the field, their ragged ranks were pulling back toward the shoreline, where boats waited to carry them to safety. Nearby, Robin ripped a strip from his own tunic and pressed it against a deep gash on his shoulder. With a couple of tight knots, the bleeding slowed. He stood, brushing dust and blood from his forearm, and called out, "Are we going after them?" Nethan rose to his feet, winded but determined. "Geertz's healing still holds," he said. "We're not too weak to give chase." A charged silence followed as they exchanged looks. Then, united by purpose, they set off in pursuit, determined not to let the beast pirates escape unpunished. Nethan was just about to answer Robin's question and head for the shore in pursuit of the beast pirates when a new and far more formidable presence washed over him. He froze, his senses sharpening as he traced the source. On the island's opposite side, an unremarkable sailboat slipped into the small cove. It wasn't a warship, just a plough, vessel, but that hardly mattered. Hovering around its deck were several unmistakable auras. Nethan didn't need to hunt down those pirates now. These men had come looking for trouble, or perhaps trouble had come for him. He swallowed the flash of arrogance rising in his chest and tamped it down. Every muscle coiled like a spring as he dialed back his intensity. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured, but his eyes glinted with cold calculation. He knew exactly who had arrived. CP0, the world government's highest-level intelligence operatives, lethal adversaries who never missed their mark. Chapter 262, CP0's Assault, First Update. Kaduka Island, 1,000 meters above sea level. President Morgans of the Grand News Agency peered through his telescope alongside his two lieutenants. None of them had slept in days, yet fatigue hadn't touched their faces. What they were witnessing was simply unbelievable. The 100 Beast Pirates have been driven off. Morgans lowered the telescope, his eyes trembling with astonishment. Even though the Phantom Hand Pirates had performed countless miracles, he had always thought their greatest challenge would be Kaido's crew. After all, Kaido was a living legend, an undead monster feared across the seas. Yet here they were. It wasn't the Phantom Hand Pirates who'd fallen back, but the Beast Pirates. Both sides had taken grievous losses, but the 100 Beast Pirates suffered the worst of it. To have repelled them outright meant the Phantom Hand Pirates had firmly secured their place among the four emperors, and now wielded the power to upend the entire New World Order. Morgans allowed himself a brief, triumphant smile. Then his expression darkened. Even this victory, he knew, might not be enough. A far greater threat was already on its way, the world government itself. Morgans froze, the gleam of discovery in his eyes. Two of his lieutenants exchanged anxious glances before one spoke up. They'd been keeping tabs on Kaduka Island, and when a seemingly ordinary sailboat made landfall there, it hadn't escaped their notice. At first, no one had thought much of it, but as the passengers disembarked and pushed inland, alarm bells rang. Morgans lifted his spyglass and trained it on the small party forging through the jungle toward Nethan, Rhodes, and the others. His breath caught. CP0, he whispered. The government's elite, here? He let the words hang. If CP0 was intervening now, it meant the world government still viewed the Ghost Hand Pirates as a dire threat. And with the 100 Beast Pirates already engaged in fierce combat, the presence of CP0 could turn this into a three-way slaughter. Worst of all, Kaido would be furious if both pirate crews were weakened or wiped out by government hands. Morgan's jaw tightened. The stakes had just skyrocketed. An unspoken rule bound the four emperors. Neither the Navy nor the world government would ever meddle in their battles. Today, however, that principle was about to be shattered. Morgan's eyes flickered with alarm as the CP0 agents, far from slowing, actually quickened their pace toward the Ghost Hand Pirates' position. Only moments ago, the Ghost Hands had rendezvoused with the Beast Pirates, and they'd paid dearly for it. Nearly every member was bloodied and bruised, their strength all but spent. Facing CP0 in such a state was nothing short of suicide. Could they even pull back in time? Morgan wondered grimly. On the island's shoreline, the masked chief of CP0 led his deputy chief and 3 sub-captains, 5 of the world government's deadliest operatives, across the sand in total silence. Their orders were crystal clear. First, recover the heart of Musgarud, the Dragon Man's devil fruit. Second, exterminate the Ghost Hand Pirates. Above all, Ghost Hand Rhodes was to be killed on sight. Arrest and trial would not suffice. As the distance closed in, the CP0 commander's low voice cut through the tension. Stay alert. We've driven off the Beast Pirates, but they must have paid a price. Don't be careless. Understood, sir, the squad leader replied with equal coolness. His deputy nodded, scanning the wreckage around them. Every member of CP0 was trained to detect the subtlest shifts in an enemy's aura, and all they sensed now was exhaustion and injury. The Ghost Hand Pirates, though once a force to rival the 4 emperors, lay scattered and spent. If even a Yonko crew could be brought so low, surely Kaido himself would crumble against such wariness. Branches snapped beneath their feet as the CP0 unit advanced through the shattered remains of the island. Craters pocked the ground, walls lay in splinters, and smoke coiled among collapsed towers. At the heart of this ruin stood Nithan and the remnants of the Ghost Hand Pirates, huddled around a makeshift clinic. Trafalgaro knelt beside Shiryu of the Rain, binding torn flesh and murmuring reassurances. All around him, sailors moaned with broken bones and deep lacerations. Although Trafalgaro's remedies were basic, gauze, salves, and bedrolls, he worked quickly, knowing that any delay could mean the difference between life and death. Nethan looked up as the CP0 agents drew nearer, his cloak stained with blood and sweat. Despite his own wounds, his eyes burned with defiance. Even now, as the enemy closed the net, he refused to show fear. If exhaustion and pain could fell giants, then this ragged band still held a spark strong enough to fight another day. Nethan knelt beside Hireding, his fingers slick with blood. There was no proper field medical kit, but by concentrating the power of his surgical fruit, he managed to staunch the worst of the bleeding and close the open wound. It was far from ideal, and already too late to save Hireding entirely, but it was the best he could do under fire. He glanced toward the shattered cityscape in the distance. There was no way they could tend to Rhodes and the other injured giants now. Their wounds were massive, and dressing them would take too long. The CP0 agents would never let them stall for that much time. Hireding's injury, at least, was small enough to be delayed further if need be. Government scum, Shilyu of the Rain muttered, stepping forward. He fished a cigar from his coat pocket, struck a match, and inhaled deeply. Smoke curled around him as he let it out in a lazy plume, one hand idly resting on the hilt of his sword. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were anything but. Rhodes stood at his side, expression cool. "We can't hold them off forever," he said. Before Nethan could reply, a roar of air split the evening stillness. From the ruins to their front, 5 CP0 operatives emerged, moving with uncanny speed. They swept across the cracked pavement and came to a dead halt, just yards from Nethan and his small band of rebels. Nethan rose to his feet, every muscle tensing for the fight to come. Around him, the wind carried the metallic tang of blood and smoke and the distant echoes of destruction. The final battle was about to begin. Nethan and his companions, Shilyu of the Rain, Fisherman, Rhodes, and the others, stood amid the shattered pillars and crumbling walls of the ruined temple. They'd barely driven off the beast pirates. Exhaustion weighed on their limbs, but their gazes remained unbowed. From the forest's edge, 5 CP0 agents advanced in perfect formation, their expressions as unreadable as marble. Even Fisherman's placid features were drawn tight with cold menace. The tallest of the group, a CP0 chief, stepped forward, each footfall echoing through the empty hall. His eyes flicked over the ragged band before him, lingering on Nethan with calculated disdain. "I had intended to intercept you as you fled," he said, voice cool and detached, "yet here we meet again." He paused, then his tone grew sharper, almost hungry. "Tell me, where is the heart of St. Musgard?" "Law." Trafalgaro shifted beside Nethan, hands closing around the hilt of his demon cutter, Kikoku. His reply was icy calm. "You'll never take it. Not while I live." A faint mocking smile curved the chief's lips, replaced in an instant by a shadow of malice. "So be it," he murmured. "Refuse me, and you'll suffer before you die." With that threat hanging in the air, the other CPO operatives spread out, weapons raised. Every muscle in Nethan's body tensed. The ancient ruin, silent for centuries, now hosted the decisive moment, the relentless might of the world government's deadliest agents versus a desperate few who dared defy it. As the wind rustled through broken stone, both sides braced for the clash that would decide the fate of St. Musgard's heart. Now was the Ghost Hand pirates' weakest moment. Their crews were scattered, their defenses all but collapsed. "Seize them!" The CP0 chief barked, and in an instant 5 agents exploded from cover, rushing Nethan and the rest of the pirate band. The CP0 chief himself hurled a brutal punch at Rhodes. Rhodes dropped into a defensive stance and met the attack head-on, folding his arms to absorb the blow without so much as a wince. Beside him, Vice Chief Yiji swept a foot in at Shilyu of the Rain. Shilyu raised his sword energy to block, but the force shoved him back a full step, clearly hastening his fatigue. One of the CP0 sub-captains lunged at the fishman, but the amphibious crew member slipped the strike with a flick of his slick scales, vanishing from the enemy's line of sight in a heartbeat. Meanwhile, Hireding, giant and still near the peak of his strength, summoned the crackling power of his ringing thunder fruit. He swung his gauntleted fist, unleashing a towering arc of lightning that engulfed the 2 remaining sub-captains. Natural devil fruit abilities cost him almost no stamina, and for a being his size, the thunderstorm he carried was devastating. Pinned on all sides and panting from exertion, the pirates had nowhere left to maneuver. The deputy chief of CP0 strolled into their midst, hands casually clasped behind his back. He gave them an appraising look, and spoke in a cool, unruffled voice. "Surrender now. You know you haven't the strength to resist us." Silence fell over the battered crew. Surrounded by elite agents and bristling with depleted energy, the Ghost Hand pirates faced a grim choice: give themselves up, or be cut down where they stood. "Could you please provide the full chapter text you'd like revised? I only see the single sentence below. Once I have the complete chapter, I'll rewrite it into smooth, idiomatic English, renaming Ross to Nethan and ensuring he's clearly portrayed as male throughout." Original snippet. Although Hireding is a trouble, the others are obviously at the end of the battle. With just one Hireding, there is no possibility of a comeback. Chapter 263, 3 Minutes, Part 2. The scene lacked the grandeur of their previous clash. The CPO subcaptain addressed Fisherman with thinly veiled sarcasm. Last time, Fisherman had intercepted their commander so decisively that nobody could tell who was winning. This time, faced with the subcaptain's assault, he'd been forced to dodge. "Comes off as a bit desperate, doesn't it?" the subcaptain continued, each word dripping with condescension. "But whether you triumph or fall, the world never pays attention to the struggle, only the final result." With that, he slammed his fist into Nethan's side. The impact sent him reeling backward 4 or 5 paces. History is a fickle judge. Apart from Pirate King Roger, who sacrificed himself to spark the golden age of piracy, almost every other legendary figure from the seas has slipped into obscurity. Take the Golden Lion, for instance. How many even remember his name? And before Roger's rise, there was the infamous Captain Rocks, father of both Kaido and Big Mom. Garp earned the title Marine Hero by defeating Rocks, yet today the world speaks only of Garp the hero. The name Rocks has all but vanished. If Nethan remained trapped here, unable to return to Advanced City, his fate would follow the same pattern, his deeds forgotten, his name fading from history until no one remembered it anymore. But Nethan had no intention of letting that happen. Chapter 14, The Last Stand. "It doesn't matter what you've done or how you did it," the masked chief of CP0 declared, his voice cold and implacable. "All that matters is the ending. You can't flee Advanced City, and if you defy the government, there's no escaping damnation. Everything stops here." With that, he lunged forward, launching a crushing blow. There was a thunderous crack as Nethan absorbed the impact, his back flying against the rubble-strewn wall. Dust fell around him, but he lifted his head slowly, his eyes as calm and clear as still water. "You're right," Nethan replied softly. "It all ends here, and I don't intend to ever see your masked face again." He raised his right hand and snapped his fingers. At that faint snap, alarm flashed in the CP Neuro Chief's eyes. He let out a low growl and surged toward Nethan, determined to finish him with a single strike. But before the attack could land, Gertz, who had fallen back to Robin's side, stepped forward. He pressed his palms together like overlapping flower petals, closed his eyes, and then opened them again. At once, a warm, golden glow spread from his hands, pulsing with the power of his healing fruit. A wave of restoration swept across the battlefield, knitting torn flesh and bolstering weary muscles. Even as the chief of CP Nero bore down on them, the tide was turning. Nethan's lips curved into a determined smile. "This ends now, not with your damnation, but with your defeat." The two forces collided in a storm of light and fury, and Advanced City held its breath. Geertz took a steadying breath and thrust his hands forward. "Healing flower," he intoned. Instantly, a brilliant white light blossomed between his palms, forming a single petal of pure radiance. Then, as if guided by an unseen hand, it split into 6 smaller petals that darted through the air and merged into the bodies of Nethan, Shilyu of the Rain, and the others. The agents of CP0 watched in stunned silence, powerless to intervene. Shock registered on every face. Something had gone terribly awry, but the petals had already done their work. Geertz cleared his throat and addressed the group. "This isn't ordinary medical magic," he explained. "Healing Flower is a unique ability that completely restores your vitality for a brief period. With my current strength, that period lasts only 3 minutes. But within those 3 minutes, no matter how severe your wounds, you'll be able to fight at full capacity, unaffected by pain or injury." Shilyu of the Rain flexed his renewed limbs, a low chuckle escaping him as fresh power thrummed through his veins. He turned his gaze on CP No's deputy chief. Who's that? Shen's face betrayed his alarm. 3 minutes, Shiryu said coolly. That'll be more than enough. Fisherman's lips curled into a frosty smile. At the same moment, Trafalgar whipped out his demon sword with a fierce cry, and Lafitte, grinning wickedly, strode forward, flanked by Rhodes and the other towering giants. All around them, the ghost hand pirates surged into action, their presence crackling with deadly intent. Across the field, the CP0 president and his agents went rigid. They could sense it immediately. Nathan and his crew had shifted into a wholly different and far more dangerous stride. Retreat, fall back now, their chief snarled, jerking his men into motion. 3 minutes, he calculated. That was all the time they needed to regroup. But Nathan wasn't about to let them flee. With icy calm, he advanced a single step, then bent the very air between them, reappearing on the chief's escape path in the blink of an eye. Before anyone could even draw breath, Nathan's fist rocketed forward, smashing into the chief's face. The battlefield went silent in the wake of that single thunderous blow. Nathan's fist whistled through the air, charged with the twisting force he'd cultivated. The CP0 vice president's face went ashen, but even his reflexes couldn't save him. He braced himself, teeth clenched, fists raised, but he never saw the punch land. The collision detonated like a thunderclap. Nathan's power, honed to perfection, overwhelmed the commander's defenses. Though the deputy chief of CP0 was a formidable fighter in his prime, he couldn't withstand that single blow. In an instant, he was sent crashing backward. Shiryu of the Rain watched the retreating officer with cold amusement. She exhaled, a plume of cigar smoke drifting from her lips, and then the ember at its tip cracked, freezing solid in midair. In the next heartbeat, she lunged forward. A blade of frigid steel descended in her hand, wreathed in a biting haze of cold. The vice president, scrambling to recover, raised his arms and unleashed his ultimate defense, the Iron Bastion. Sparks flew as blade met barrier, but Shiryu's chill seeped through every crack and crevice. Frost snaked across his uniform, turning it the dull white of a frozen pond. 3 minutes, Shiryu said, her voice eerily calm. After that, this ends, for good. Nathan's expression went cold as he drew the demon's blade. At the same moment, he activated his surgical fruit power. With barely a sound, he swapped places with the jagged rock at his feet and materialized directly in front of the stunned CP0 subcaptain, bringing his knife down in a vicious arc. The subcaptain barely had time to react. He braced himself with Buso Shoku Haki, forcing Nathan's blade to glance off his armored arm. Sparks flew everywhere, and though the blade failed to slice through, the impact slammed him off balance. Before he could recover, Nathan unleashed his next move. His body crackled with electricity as he summoned Hyading, a massive bolt of thunder and lightning that tore through the air. The CP0 officer couldn't dodge. He raised his arms in a futile defense as the torrent of lightning struck him squarely. Crackling power ripped apart his hockey shielding. In an instant, his clothes were charred black, smoke curling from his mouth as his limbs went limp. He collapsed to his knees, paralyzed and grievously injured, though not killed outright. All around them, the rest of the Straw Hat crew joined the fray. Rhodes and Statham, two towering giants, stomped forward, their movements slower but every bit as devastating. Above the deck, Lafitte and Robin rained down precise attacks. In moments, several CP0 agents lay writhing on the planks, severely wounded by the combined assault. "Damn!" Nathan muttered, sheathing his blade as he scanned the battlefield. The tide of the fight had shifted, and it was only just beginning. Commander CP0 watched in horror as his men were routed in mere seconds. Beneath his mask, his expression grew unspeakably grim. Had this 3-minute window been granted to the beast pirates, they might have squeezed out a delay, but not here. Luo's Soru technique sliced through space with blinding speed, while Robin's Hana no Mi allowed her to strike relentlessly from a distance, unbound by any need for proximity. And Nathan, once known as Ross, warped reality itself, folding space across kilometers to confound anyone who dared pursue him. As for the fishman, empowered by the Kuja no Mi, his raw velocity was virtually unrivaled. Only Kiwi could hope to match him, and even then only briefly. Escape? Impossible. When two forces are evenly matched, you can at least hold them off. But the Ghost Hand pirates at the height of their power boasted more than twice the strength of CP0's squadron. Any thought of buying time had long since vanished. Nethin's fist rocketed forward like a battering ram. The CP-No commander staggered back, just long enough for Nethin to draw his blade in one fluid motion. He lunged, slashing through empty air, and the sword erupted through space itself, driving straight into the commander's right chest. The commander's eyes snapped open in shock, but even as blood blossomed around the wound, he snatched the blade with one massive hand. Nothing about this veteran fighter was ordinary. His hulking, half-human form hinted at an ancient Zoan devil fruit, though Nethin couldn't place the exact beast. Before the commander could reclaim his advantage, Nethin charged. He planted his foot against the commander's side and delivered a savage kick to his right shoulder. The commander flipped overhead, crashing onto the ruined pavement with such force that a jagged fissure spider-webbed outward. Nethin didn't hesitate. Withdrawing his sword, he twisted his arm in a savage arc and slammed his fist into the ground. The earth shuddered and buckled under a spiraling force, forming a yawning vortex nearly 50 meters across. Stones and debris spiraled into the churning maw, and a shockwave of earth-shattering power rippled through the battlefield, rattling everything for dozens of meters in every direction. Silence followed, fractured only by the settling dust and the fallen commander's labored breathing. Nethin stood at the center of the upheaval, sword in hand, eyes cold and unyielding. He'd unleashed his full strength, and now the true reckoning could begin. As the dust settled, the CP-0 commander stumbled back into view, his uniform in tatters and a thin strand of blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Before he could gather himself, Nethin closed the gap in a heartbeat. The commander frantically brought up his fists to block, relying on his honed martial prowess. Prowess that, on paper, even surpassed Nethin's by a hair. But technique alone couldn't withstand Nethin's raw power. In the span of seconds, 10 punishing blows struck home. The final strike sent the commander hurtling into the crumbling remains of a nearby ruin. Had he not awakened a Zoan devil fruit, granting him rapid regeneration, beefed-up defenses, and uncanny reflexes, he'd be in far worse shape. Even now, he winced but remained standing, his injuries nothing more than surface cuts. Nethin's voice was cool and unhurried as he surveyed his opponent. "You're stronger than I gave you credit for." The commander, brow furrowed, gave a curt nod. Deep down, he knew his wounds were superficial. After all, only someone at Marine Admiral caliber could hold a CP-0 command post and survive a beating like this. Nethin studied the battlefield with cold precision. Throughout the Grand Line, many fighters could hold their own against a general, but to truly crush one was almost unheard of. Given a full day, he was over 90% certain he could eliminate the CP-0 commander outright. 3 minutes felt far too short. Yet, with his power now more than doubled, even 2 minutes had proven almost enough. By then, the fight on the other side was all but decided. The CP-No deputy commander lay grievously wounded. 3 of their sub-commanders were already dead. The deputy and the lone surviving sub-captain staggered under Helding's relentless assault, hardly worth noticing now. Nethin trusted Helding to finish them off without breaking a sweat. All that remained was the CP-No commander himself. In a blur of motion, Shiryu, Rain, and Fisherman lunged toward their target. Fisherman flipped a coin between his fingers, then, with a fierce concentration of his quick fruit ability, sent it hurtling through the air like a razor-sharp projectile aimed at the commander's back. The commander, just freed from the shattered rubble, sensed the attack at the last possible moment. He channeled every ounce of his armament hockey into a makeshift shield, twisting his body just enough to deflect the coin's lethal edge. But before he could recover, Shiryu stormed in. His sword, coated in glistening frost, ascended in a single unforgiving arc. The frozen blade bit into the commander's side, cleaving through armor and flesh alike. He staggered beneath the blow, caught between Fisherman's ricocheting coin and the merciless slash of ice. As the CP-0 commander teetered on the brink, Nethin advanced, every muscle coiled for the final strike. The battlefield fell silent around them, the outcome poised on a knife's edge. Nethin moved like lightning. With a sharp crack, he caught Shiryu the Rain's blade on his forearm and slapped it aside, only to have the captain's frigid aura lash back, covering half his torso in piercing frost. Undeterred, Nethan vaulted into the air and drove a punch straight into Shiryu's chest. A geyser of blood spurted out as the CPO captain convulsed and tumbled backward. Before Shiryu could recover, Nethan reappeared behind him and delivered a brutal kick. Like a kicked ball, Shiryu was sent flying, spitting up more blood as he went. No sooner had he hit the ground than Fisherman struck from one side with a razor-sharp blade, and Shiryu himself unleashed a devastating destruction cannon blast from the other. The wounded captain of CP0 barely had time to cross his arms in defense. The twin onslaught overwhelmed him, and he was hurled back once more, skidding across the deck as the two attacks tore at his defenses. Nethan tracked the battle's rhythm by the count of his breaths. It had been almost 3 minutes. His eyes flared as he drew upon the twisting power coiled within his body. He channeled it into his fist until the air around his knuckles warped and shimmered with distortion, heralding the next unstoppable strike. Commander CP0's chief, Ryan, had barely recovered from the first 2 blows, one from Shiryu of the Rain, the other from Nethan the Fishman, when a third strike caught him completely off guard. His body flipped end over end in midair, unable to twist free or muster any defense against 3 ruthless attacks in rapid succession. Even his armament hockey failed to coalesce. Boom! Nethan's fist connected squarely with the back of Ryan's ribcage. The invisible sheen of hockey shattered under the impact, and raw force blasted through his defenses. Though Ryan wielded the ancient Zoan devil fruit and boasted extraordinary resilience, this single blow proved too much. His spine curved violently, his limbs drawing in as he was flung forward like a snapped twig. Boom! He slammed into the earth 100 meters away, and the shockwave rippled outward in concentric circles, as if a meteor had struck. Dust and debris scattered in all directions. When the dust settled, the CPO chief lay motionless. With the highest agent of the world government's secret intelligence agency defeated, the kill was official. Nethan's system confirmed the reward. 140 talent proficiency points earned, plus 1 free talent point added to his pool. The synthetic chime of the system rang sharply in Nethan's ears, and the extraordinary power that had surged through his body drained away like a receding tide. He collapsed to his knees, then to the ground, landing heavily but without injury. Across the field, Rainblade Shiryu and the fisherman likewise wavered on unsteady feet, their own energy spent. "Are you done for?" Shiryu panted, voice cracking with exhaustion. Nethan gave a short nod. Thanks to Gears' special intervention, the Flower of Healing's restoration had only just worn off, leaving him with a residue of strength. He forced himself upright, heart hammering, and sprinted toward Herding and the others. Shiryu and the fisherman exchanged a glance and staggered forward to keep pace. At that moment, Lafitte, Luo, and the remaining fighters found their powers ebbing too. They could no longer stand their ground in battle. Nearby, the CP0 deputy chief lay battered on scorched earth, his once imposing frame marred by charred flesh and searing pain. Seizing the opportunity, Herding summoned a crackling arc of lightning between his palms and flung it at the fallen agent. In his prime, the deputy chief Woe would have slipped aside in an instant. Now, drained and disoriented, he could offer no evasion. The bolt struck him full on, illuminating the ruined landscape with blinding light. A thunderous crack echoed across the field. Nethan tasted metal in his mouth, braced himself, and pressed onward. As the crackling arc of lightning faded into the night, Nethan materialized behind the deputy chief of CP0. In a single, fluid motion, he drove the demon sword Murasame deep into the man's chest. Blood spurted across the dark pavement. The deputy chief's eyes flew open in shock and disbelief. He strained to twist around, but his strength drained away like water slipping through one's fingers, and he crumpled to the ground in silence. Nethan shook his head and withdrew Murasame, letting the blade drip in the faint glow of street lamps. With that final strike, the job was done. Apart from the lone team leader he had intentionally spared, every other operative, including the chief and his deputy, lay defeated. And all of it had taken less than 4 minutes. Chapter 265, The Era of the Five Emperors, First Update. Nethan slid the demon sword Murakami back into its sheath and called out to his team, "Fall back, now!" Together with Helding, he'd just slain the CP0 deputy chief, and in the process they'd unleash the power of the Flower of Healing to push themselves to their absolute limits. With the rest of the CP0 cell eliminated, none of their enemies remained in any condition to keep fighting. Even if the beast pirates, or Kaido himself, decide to hunt us once CP0 disappears, Nethan continued, our safest bet is to evacuate the island immediately. He glanced over his shoulder at the wounded CP0 sub-captain slung across Gears' back. Gears, he said, voice firm but calm, make sure he survives. I'm not keeping him as a hostage or as another toy for Sugar. He's reserved for Trafalgaro's mind swap procedure. Gears nodded without hesitation. With a soft murmur, he poured a faint halo of regenerative energy into the half-dead operative, knitting torn flesh and steadying his pulse. Then he fell in step with the rest of the retreating force. For nearly 3 days and nights, the island had been a battlefield. Explosions had rocked the shoreline, blades had clashed in crimson arcs, and titanic powers had been unleashed. Now at last, the fighting was over. As Nithan led his comrades toward the distant jungles, the smoke began to clear, and a new era of uncertainty loomed on the horizon. Aboard a custom reconnaissance craft, high above the battlefield, Morgans and his crew, who had been monitoring and recording every moment of the war, wiped cold sweat from their brows and exchanged stunned glances. It was finally over. No one had expected the Ghost Hand pirates to mount a counterattack of this magnitude. They had feared that Rhodes and his men, already engaged against the beast pirates, would be caught off guard by CP0's elite assassins. Yet, within mere minutes of that near face-to-face encounter, the agents of the world government lay defeated. Even after their brutal clash with Kaido's forces, the Ghost Hand pirates still possessed enough strength to eliminate the CP0 squad sent to finish the job. It was nothing short of extraordinary. Now, more than ever, the balance of power in the New World was shifting toward the age of the Five Emperors. Morgans drew a steadying breath, the shock still flickering in his eyes as he finally spoke. This changes everything. A few days later, word spread like wildfire across the seas. Nithan had led the Ghost Hand pirates into a relentless 3-day, 3-night battle against the beast pirates on Kaduka Island and emerged victorious. Kaido's once feared horde was driven back, shattered and broken. As the news reached every port and outpost, the world trembled at the dawn of a new era. From that day on, the term Five Emperors was no longer spoken in hushed quotation marks. The age of the Four Emperors had come to an end, and the New World fully entered the era of the Five Emperors. Mary Geois, the Holy Land of the world government. In the highest office atop the palace, the five elders sat in solemn quiet, their faces grave. One by one they spoke, and with each word the room grew heavier, charged with an almost palpable tension. The balance is broken, Elder Mitukio intoned, his voice echoing against marble walls. A murmur of assent swept the chamber. In the past, the Four Emperors had maintained a precarious standoff, and together with the Marines and the Seven Warlord system, they had kept the seas from descending into total chaos. To the Five Elders, these gladiatorial power struggles in the New World had always seemed a distant concern. After all, conceding a slice of ocean to the Emperors was a small price for overall stability. But then Nethan appeared, Elder Yorifuji continued, narrowing his eyes. His relentless onslaught shattered that equilibrium. Heads dipped in agreement. The world government had hurriedly recruited 2 new warlords to fill the gap, but the upheaval caused by the Dressrosa incident had pushed the entire system to the brink of collapse. If we stand by idly, Elder Kurodake warned, the empires will overrun one another, and our grip on the sea will unravel. Elder Ryomatsu leaned forward, voice low and steady. We cannot dither. The New World's fate will be decided long before we reach consensus. Silence fell once more as each elder absorbed the weight of his words. Outside the windows, the spires of Mary Geois gleamed in the sunshine, but inside, the dawn of the Five Emperors era felt darker than ever. The world teetered on the edge of upheaval, and only swift, decisive action could hope to restore the broken balance. The council chamber was hushed, except for the faint hum of the globe of red hovering at its center. On the globe, the markers for the Four Emperors of the Sea pulsed uneasily, an ever-shifting balance of power. Admiral Wu Laoxing, the renowned swordsman, spoke first. His hand hovered near the hilt of his blade. The moment a fifth emperor emerges, the equilibrium between the four emperors collapses, he said, his tone as cold as steel. With roads openly hostile toward both the world government and the navy, events will only turn more disastrous for us, unless the remaining four emperors can neutralize this new threat, the ghost hand pirates. That tenuous global balance won't hold indefinitely. He paused, scanning the room with a steely gaze. Perhaps it's time we carried out a cleanup. A heavy silence followed. Then Elder Five-Star, a veteran officer whose scarred face told of countless campaigns, leaned in, speaking almost too softly to carry. Not yet, he warned. The New World's chaos won't engulf the entire seas overnight. There's no need to rouse Lord Yimu prematurely. Right now, the Ghost Hand pirates are squeezed between our forces and the four emperors. If they're to grow their power, they must clash more than once with those titans. It would be reckless for us to intervene at this stage. Instead, let our intelligence network track every development in the New World. We wait and watch. Far out on the ocean, the Black Gale, flagship of the Ghost Hand pirates, cut through the waves under a leaden sky. On deck, the crew stood in tense silence, swords at the ready. Their bounties remained unchanged, for now. Nothing's going to change anytime soon. Lafitte leans back in his chair, flipping through today's paper with a dismissive shrug. Looks like the CP Neuro incident won't see the light of day, he remarks. A few feet away, Shiryu, known among the crew as the Rainmaker, takes a slow drag from his cigar, exhaling a lazy plume of smoke. Lafitte folds the newspaper neatly in half. No word on it at all, he says, just as we expected. Fisherman crunches a peanut in his cheek and grins. But driving off the beast pirates? That'll spread like wildfire. Right now, the Ghost Hand pirates desperately need a reputation boost. Think about it. Any island under a Yonko's protection stays unchallenged because the four emperors' names echo across the seas. No sensible pirate dares to provoke them. Until this victory, we weren't even in a position to plant our flag. Now that we've repelled Kaido's crew, if we had the resources, we could claim territory anywhere we wanted. Meanwhile, in the mansion's bathhouse, Nico Robin gently washes Sugar in a large porcelain tub. Warm water laps around the child's chubby arms as Robin carefully lathers soap into her soft curls. During the previous battle, Commander Xia Tang had held his toy soldiers in reserve. None of them ever saw the battlefield. Robin scrubbed at the suds in her hair, trying to ignore the dull ache in her shoulder. The inch-long cut gouged into her skin and the faded bruise beneath her neck were stubborn reminders of their last skirmish. True, her Nukama shell toys had some fighting power of their own, but hiding Robin's devil fruit abilities remained top priority. Unless things got desperate, she'd never be sent onto the front lines. Lieutenant Luo and Dr. Gears, Shift's medical specialists, had already erased every trace of infec, tie-in and scarring. No one would guess she'd been wounded at all. A soft creak on the deck outside told her exactly who was coming. Nithan slipped into the cramped bathing compartment, loosening the belt of his robe. He rarely bathed alone. Every liter of water counted aboard this ship, but tonight he'd made an exception. Robin's heart thumped, but she kept her voice even. "Can I still wash up with that shoulder like this?" she asked, wet foam dripping down her back. He shrugged as he draped his jacket over a hook. "It's getting late. You need the bath more than I do." A silent beat passed. In the steamy half-light, only one person on the vessel would have dared barge in like this without so much as a knock. Robin stiffened, but Nethan showed no interest in prying. He simply turned away, settled onto a small bench, and closed his eyes. Robin hesitated, then raised her chin. She dove straight into the warm tub, water rippling around her. Somehow, her usual cool composure deserted her. The unexpected intimacy of the moment sucked all her breath away and left her shockingly aware of Nethan's quiet presence just beyond the steam. Nethan's dive was perfect. He knew that as a devil fruit user, Sugar would be powerless in water. Her head bobbed just above the surface while the rest of her body went rigid the instant it hit the bath. Paralyzed, she sank beneath the waves and couldn't pull herself back up. This wasn't an ordinary tub. The ship they'd boarded was built by giants, so every fixture, including the bathtub, was scaled accordingly. Even so, Nico Robin could only manage to fill it to about 1/5 capacity by drawing in seawater. That was more than enough to seal Sugar's fate. Sugar thrashed desperately, her arms and legs jerking as she struggled to keep her face clear of the water. Her devil fruit powers failed her utterly, and the helpless look in her eyes made Nethin's lips curl with satisfaction. Suddenly, Rhodes let out a low chuckle. He raised a single finger to the surface of the water, and with a subtle distortion of his devil fruit ability, the entire bath erupted in a spray. In an instant, Sugar shot back up into Rhodes's arms, drenched but alive. Water cascaded off her as he set her down on the deck, arms crossed, his expression dark. "What were you thinking?" Rhodes snapped, his voice cold. "Trying to drown yourself in a bathtub? You need serious guidance. Your devil fruit ability is far too valuable to squander like this." He shook his head, a faint scowl on his lips. "Honestly, drowning in a bath has to be one of the saddest ways for a devil fruit user to go. You'd best remember that next time." By now, Sugar couldn't even respond to Nethin's question. His eyes had glazed over, a clear sign he'd already drunk himself senseless. Ugh. Robin stood off to the side and sighed. She felt no sympathy. All she wanted was to teach her captain a lesson. Chapter 266, Mind Replacement Surgery, Part 2. Sugar's sudden collapse sent a ripple through the whole ship. The moment she blacked out, the power of her Hobi no Mi fizzled, and every person she turned into a toy snapped back to their human forms. They still looked like 10-year-olds, but their plaything bodies instantly vanished, leaving them dazed and clutching one another for support. No one, not even Admiral Fujitora, had the faintest idea what transpired in the bathroom. All they'd heard was a scuffle, a muffled groan, and then Sugar hitting the deck with a thud. Captain Nethin emerged moments later, his expression unreadable. "Did he knock her out?" Fisherman spat onto the planks in disbelief. Even in toy form, he'd felt strong, yet Nethin had single-handedly brought down the woman whose devil fruit could freeze anyone with a touch. Pirate life was nothing if not extraordinary. Whitebeard collected sons, Big Mom hosted endless feasts, and Kaido had his own brand of chaos. But their captain quietly subduing Sugar on his own turf? That was the sort of bold move you simply didn't question. Lafayette cracked a wry smile at Fisherman's stunned face. Shiryu of the Rain lounged against the rail, flicking water from his sword as the newly restored children began to stir, confusion and relief mixing in their wide eyes. No one challenged Nethin's methods, not today at least. The ship's deck buzzed with whispered speculations, but one thing was clear. Their captain had just rewritten the rules. Captain Nethin sat on the bathroom floor, panting slightly as he finished bandaging Xiatang's forehead. He just administered first aid and brought her back from the brink of unconsciousness. Now, to keep her from collapsing again, he draped a lightweight robe around her shoulders and fastened it at the neck. Beyond the door, the ship's toys, the crew members who'd been transformed into playthings, had all reverted to human form. But the moment they became flesh and blood again, they'd fallen into comas. Nethin rose, slipped the first aid kit aside, and addressed Xiatang in a firm voice. "Go change into something dry. Then have Lafitte take point on the deck. You'll help him convert everyone back into toys, one by one." He reached out to unclasp the silver bracelet from her wrist. At the simple click of metal on metal, Xiatang blinked awake. She sat up abruptly, her eyes wide with shock. For a long heartbeat, she said nothing, then finally let one word slip past her lips. "Abnormal." Nethin cocked his head. "What did you just say?" Xiatang's cheeks flamed. I didn't say anything." She wrapped the robe tighter around herself and bolted from the room. Once the door clicked shut, Nethin ran a hand through his hair and sighed. "I really can't have everyone worrying at once," he muttered. "What a headache." Nethin toweled off, slipped into his robe, and stepped out of the bathroom. He'd barely managed a quick shower before heading straight to Dr. Luo's laboratory. No time for luxuries when cutting-edge research was underway. The lab's harsh fluorescent lights hummed overhead. In the center of the room, CP Neo's deputy commander lay immobilized. Steel manacles bit into his wrists and ankles, each cuff locked by Mr. High and chained to heavy floor anchors. Even someone of his legendary strength couldn't pry himself free. Against the far wall, 3 pirates slumped in sleek restraint chairs. Moments ago, they'd been living toys, victims of Sugar's devil fruit, but Dr. Luo had reversed the transformation so they'd return to human form. Disarmed and sedated, They were now perfect test subjects for his true experiment, mind surgery. Nethan watched the pirates stir, confusion in their eyes. He stepped closer to Dr. Luo's operating console, where monitors displayed pulsing brainwaves and neural mapping diagrams. Traditional brainwashing of elite fighters, warriors with wills as ironclad as the three calamities, required years of torture, countless sessions of hypnosis, and even then success was uncertain and dangerous. By contrast, mind surgery promised precision, a direct reconfiguration of thought and loyalty in a matter of hours. To Nethan, this breakthrough eclipsed every novelty devil fruit he'd ever encountered. It wasn't mere entertainment or a battlefield gimmick. It was the ultimate weapon. He inclined his head to Dr. Luo. "Proceed." The surgeon adjusted her mask, dipped gloved fingers into sterile gel, and placed them on the first pirate's temple. On the screens, brainwave patterns shifted. In that instant, Nethan knew the face of warfare and domination had changed forever. Nethan pushed open the heavy laboratory door and stepped inside. Luo looked up from the holoprojector, his expression troubled. "Take someone like our CP0 sub-captain," Luo began. "He's impossible to brainwash through ordinary means, but with psychic surgery, we can overwrite his original soul with one that's already been conditioned. The catch is, the new soul can't immediately tap into the sub-captain's full power. At first, you only get about 5 or 6 points of effectiveness. Over time, though, the implanted consciousness adapts and gradually unlocks more of his strength." He tapped a control console, bringing up a looping sequence of neural scans. This ability lets us field powerful fighters in batches. It's one of the main reasons Rhodes has never recruited mid- or low-level crew members. There's simply no need. Why hire dozens of untested soldiers when you can co-opt an elite? Someday he might even annex the other 4 emperors. Luo shook his head. But so far we haven't nailed it. Every attempt has triggered various adverse reactions in the subject. Nethan stepped closer, peering at the neural readouts. "Is the problem that the grafted soul can't withstand the sub-captain's unique physiology?" "Not just that," Luo replied with a sigh. "I'm still refining the technique, and on top of everything, our subject actively resists the procedure. Until I solve both issues, we're stuck at subpar performance." Nethan studied Luo's worried face. The promise of psychic surgery was enormous, but so were the risks. And until they mastered it, Rhodes's grand plan to command empires would remain just out of reach. Nethan watched Luo frown in concentration as he prepared the mind transference procedure. Although Luo had only recently mastered the technique, his inexperience was already clear. Even more troublesome was the sheer mental resilience of the CP0 team leader, far beyond what an ordinary soul could contain. Forcing an average mind into Kaido's hulking body, for example, would be like asking a child to wield a 40-meter greatsword, impossible to control. Luo's approach depended on matching 2 individuals whose spirits and wills were roughly equal. If the gap was too wide, neither host nor guest could adapt to the swap. Nethan knew that using random pirates as test subjects was merely a preliminary step. His ultimate plan was far more ambitious, to swap the minds of his brainwashed soldiers, loyalists isolated on the empty island, into the bodies of CP0 sub-captains, thereby expanding his own fighting force with enemy operatives under his command. Yet, even this target would prove difficult. The CP0 sub-captains possessed extraordinary mental fortitude. Reaching higher into the ranks of the 3 disasters or the 4 emperors would be exponentially harder. Attempting to inhabit Kaido himself, or one of his greater beasts, bordered on the unattainable. Still, Nethan had mapped out every step. First, refine Luo's technique on expendable pirates. Next, perfect the process on the brainwashed foot soldiers. Finally, when the mind transference was reliable, he would move up the chain of command, no matter how daunting the challenge. It was a bold scheme, but in Nethan's eyes, entirely within reach. Since Kaido proved unkillable by ordinary means, Luo has devised a radical alternative: attack him at his core and rip out his soul. Through a kind of psychic surgery, he believes they can seize Kaido's very essence and grant that power to whoever becomes the vessel. But the operation has 3 ironclad requirements. First, they must completely suppress Kaido's beast form. Unless Kaido's physical and spiritual energies are locked down, his overwhelming will could shatter any attempt at mind forging. Second, Luo himself must elevate his strength to a precise threshold. Any less, and Kaido's raw momentum will spill through the psychic barriers. And third, they need a human host whose body can withstand Kaido's monstrous physiology and who will submit to Luo's commands without hesitation. All three conditions must align. Luo sets his calculations in motion. "Give me 10.5 days to prepare," he says, his voice measured. "Shorten the schedule, and if our volunteer's spirit is only average, they'll only manifest 1/10 of a CP0 sub-captain's power, hardly worth the risk." He sips his water, then fixes Nethan with a determined gaze. That's the bottom line. The deputy commander of CP0 was every bit as formidable as the flying squirrels and other top generals Nethan had faced, arguably even stronger. Yet even if his power were reduced by 80 or 90%, he'd still stand on par with the headquarters major generals. And such opponents were far from invincible. A CP0 deputy commander wasn't some weakling. He could tie up 8 or 10 enemies single-handedly. There was no reason to panic. Nethan studied Luo with deliberate calm. He'd already anticipated one major obstacle, his own limited spiritual willpower. Fortunately, there was one ability that perfectly addressed this weakness: Big Mom's Soul Fruit. With its power to manipulate souls, he could spawn a soul incarnation, a spectral avatar so potent that not even a CP0 deputy commander could control it, much less the three disasters or Kaido in beast form. And by combining that soul avatar with Luo's mind replacement technique, he'd create an utterly loyal combatant immune to betrayal. However, securing the soul fruit is no simple task. Nethan neither wields the powers of a darkness fruit nor boasts the extraordinary physiology that once let Big Mom command it. To claim the soul fruit for himself, he must first bring down Big Mom, one of the 4 emperors, a feat few have ever achieved. Only after her defeat will the fruit resurface somewhere in the vast ocean, giving him a chance to seize it. And even then, the hunt is far from over. Should another pirate snatch and consume the fruit before Nethan can reach it, he'd be forced to eliminate that new bearer and restart his pursuit all over again. Chapter 67, Level 3. Nethan stepped out of Dr. Luo's laboratory, the soul fruit secured in his grip. A thoughtful gleam entered his eyes as he considered the balance of power among the 4 emperors. The gap between them was almost negligible. Big Mom might be a shade weaker than Kaido, but only just. More significantly, her crew boasted 4 mighty generals who formed a backbone stronger than the beast pirates ever could. With the current strength of the Ghost Hand pirates, Nethan knew he could smash through the Big Mom pirates without breaking a sweat. Yet the soul fruit remained the true linchpin of his strategy. No single emperor, even 2 in concert, could overthrow the world government on sheer force alone. The navy was only the most visible arm of that power. Beneath the surface lay a labyrinth of political and military apparatus that had been forged over 8 centuries. Between the celestial dragons, the world nobles, the various cipher Paul units, and the admirals and vice-admirals still loyal to the throne, the world government's foundations were unshakable. Relying solely on brute strength would never be enough. To win this war, Nethan needed more than raw power. He needed the soul fruit's hidden potential to tip the scales against an empire 800 years in the making. Nethan reviewed the intelligence reports one last time. What he was up against lay far beyond even the 4 emperors' reach, surpassing the 5 elders and the fabled hidden king of ancient weapons. Such forces remained shrouded in mystery, but one thing was certain: with the soul fruit in his grasp, victory would be his. Just as Blackbeard had pursued the darkness fruit to mass-produce devil fruit users, Nethan planned to exploit his soul manipulation powers to swell the ranks of the Ghost Hand pirates indefinitely. Yet he knew that, if he was to crush the Big Mom pirates, raw strength alone would not suffice. Pushing that concern aside, he slipped away to his private quarters. There, with a single thought, he summoned the talent system interface. His recent triumph over CP0 had netted him 140 proficiency points, and more importantly, 1 free talent point. Counting those already saved, he now held 3 unspent points. As these were far too precious to squander, Nethan weighed his options carefully. Could he further enhance the soul fruit's latent power? Or perhaps he might employ the latest technology that allowed inanimate objects to consume devil fruits, fusing the demon sword Muramasa with his own soul fruit into a single, devastating blade. The possibilities were both thrilling and daunting, but in Nethan's hands, they would all become weapons. Nethan stared at the talent system interface, weighing his options. If brute force couldn't sever the soul of a true blade, he'd have to revisit the synergy of his devil fruit powers, and his distortion ability still had room to grow. After a moment's thought, he allocated 50 proficiency points to his distortion fruit. A golden pulse of light confirmed the upgrade. Current talent proficiencies: ranged combat 50, melee combat 100, distortion fruit 750, Navy 6, shave technique 0, Navy 6 paper painting 0. Moonstep 0, observation hockey 200-200, armament hockey 200-200, conqueror's hockey 0. A tangible surge of warped energy rippled through Nethan's limbs. His distortion power had grown noticeably stronger. In pure attacking strength, he felt he was now drawing close to Whitebeard at his prime. 90 points remained unspent. 50 went into the sturdy rock talent, bolstering his defensive resilience. The final 40 he devoted to agility enhancement, ensuring his movements stayed razor-sharp. He'd considered upgrading to the advanced Moonstep, but for now he'd rely on his refined distortion fruit and the basic Moonstep to maneuver effortlessly in midair. With his newly strengthened abilities, Nethan felt more confident than ever that he could face whatever challenge lay ahead. Nethan had been training without pause, using even gravity augmentation to intensify his workouts, but no matter how hard he pushed, he couldn't hope to surpass masters like Karp, who'd spent decades honing their skills. Still, the combination of his agility enhancement, the aerial control granted by twisted gravity, and the spatial leaps of twisted space convinced him that further improvement in pure flight wasn't necessary. Once his agility enhancement reached its peak, his speed in midair nearly matched that of the yellow monkey. In close quarters, the yellow monkey still held a slight edge. Over long distances, Nethan's spatial jumps proved faster. With his agility enhancement maxed out, dealing with Kaido's beasts would become significantly easier. Suddenly, a golden glow swept over him, and his general talent tree updated. Agility enhancement, 460, peak enhancement. Physical enhancement, 500, maxed. Spirituality, 0, primary enhancement. Toughness, 200, maxed. Rock affinity, 100, advanced enhancement. His agility enhancement had climbed to 460 points, and his rock affinity broke through to the advanced tier at 100 points. Nethan felt a surge of confidence. He was finally leveling up in ways that truly mattered. With his rock affinity now maxed out at 100, Nethan's speed and defensive power have soared to astonishing levels. Where a bullet once left a chalky white welt on his skin, now it can't even scratch him. Not even heavy artillery could pierce his rock-hardened hide, and the muscle beneath is tougher than steel. And that's before he calls on armament hockey. Once he does, his defense will climb even higher. In raw physical terms alone, Nethan could take on a Navy admiral and come out unscathed. The moment he adds his space distortion ability to the mix, it becomes a matter of seconds before any admiral is overwhelmed. In his previous clash with Kaido, the two titans fought to a stalemate, exhausting one another completely. Kaido never saw it coming. Nethan's ability to bend space at will, combined with the devastating instant sky slash, sapped Kaido's stamina blow by blow, ultimately forcing them both to their limits. Had the previous battle replayed itself, Kaido fully aware of every one of Nethan's abilities and responding flawlessly, Nethan would surely have been the first to exhaust his stamina. But now, with his speed, strength, and defense each boosted by a full point, the situation was completely different. Confronting the beast Kaido again, Nethan wouldn't need to bend space or resort to elaborate tricks. He could meet Kaido head-on and might even sap the Emperor's energy before his own ran dry. Last time had been sheer luck. This time, it was pure power. Tactics can be countered, but raw force is unbreakable. Even if Kaido anticipated every move, Nethan still judged his chances of victory at 60%. Against Big Mom, that figure climbed to 70. Clenching his fists, he felt the surge of his newfound might, his eyes shining with determination. to stand at the pinnacle of the seas with a 70% shot against one of the four emperors. That was a terrifying kind of power. In these waters, who could ever claim absolute certainty? One mistake, one moment's hesitation, and the entire course of the fight could rewrite itself. Nethan studied the data scrolling across his vision. To him, the gap between level 97, 98, and 99 was almost imperceptible. Yet in a high-stakes duel, misallocating a single skill could decide everything. If Whitebeard at his prime represented the absolute pinnacle, level 100, then even now he still ranked a solid 99. Kaido hovered around 98, and Big Mom barely cracked 97. Shanks, with his trademark red hair, remained an enigma. Intel on him was so scarce that Nethan couldn't pin down an exact rank, but there was no doubt he fell somewhere between 97 and 100. All Marine Admirals scored above 95, with Akainu and Kizaru flirting with the upper 90s, and legends like Garp and the Five Elders unquestionably claimed spots near the very top. And Nethan was certain of one. In a system built on talent, even level 100 wasn't the limit. He still had far greater heights to conquer. Chapter 268, Target Big Mom, Part 4. Nethan spent the last of his 140 talent proficiency points, and the faintly glowing system interface blinked out of view. He stepped from the training room into the grand hall, sank onto the sofa, and closed his eyes in meditation. His mind raced with one burning question. How could he eliminate Big Mom without falling into Kaido's crosshairs? As one of the 5 emperors of the New World, every move he made would send shockwaves across the seas. His feud with Kaido was far from over, and striking Big Mom risked drawing Kaido into the fray. After all, Kaido and Big Mom had both served under the legendary Rocks pirates in the era before the revolution, and Kaido still owed her a substantial debt. That debt didn't guarantee Kaido's loyalty, but it certainly made the situation murky. Time was against him. Hesitate too long, and he'd lose the element of surprise. Yet, with the Ghost Hand pirate's current strength, toppling an emperor in a single strike was no small feat. If he could pull it off, however, he wouldn't just eliminate a rival, he'd cement his place as the most formidable captain among the 5 emperors. Nethan sat at the chart table, restless, his eyes tracing the lines of ocean before him. 7 days had passed since they left Kaduka Island, and the cabins were growing dreadfully quiet as food and fresh water ran low. He closed his eyes, weighing their dwindling supplies against the dangers that lay ahead. Just then, Lafitte appeared in the doorway. He carried himself with that effortless calm that made him so useful in tight spots. Nethan looked up. "Captain," Lafitte said, "we have 2 choices. We can stop at Kono Island to restock and then head back to Dressrosa, or we can strike at Wano country and challenge the beast pirates in Kaido's territory." Nethan leaned forward. "If we go after Kaido now, we won't stand a chance. Even a small foothold in his domain would be quickly crushed. Our crew isn't ready for an all-out war against one of the 4 emperors." Lafitte nodded slowly. "Kaido is a problem, but so are the others. Big Mom, Shanks, Blackbeard, any one of them would respond with full force if their territory were violated. Picking a fight with a Yonko is always a monumental risk." They were silent for a moment, the hush of the cabin filled only by the gentle creak of the ship. Nethan swept his hand across the map, the territories of the emperors marked in bold strokes. "So," Nethan said at last, "what if we don't fight them? At least not immediately. What if we seek an alliance instead?" Lafitte raised an eyebrow. "You mean turning to the Big Mom pirates?" Nethan tapped Big Mom's territory on the map. "Exactly. We offer her something she can't refuse, proof of our loyalty and the promise of support in her conflicts. In return, she grants us safe passage, supplies, maybe even ships. With that backing, we could grow strong enough to challenge Kaido later." Lafitte considered this, folding his arms. "An alliance with Big Mom would indeed solve our supply issues, and her protection would keep us from being crushed by other Yonko. But she's not known for forgiving slights. We'd have to tread very carefully." Nethan met his first mate's gaze, determination shining in his eyes. "I know the risks, but right now, that's our best chance to build power instead of lining up to be cannon fodder. Chart a course to Tato Land. Prepare the formal greeting, no weapons drawn until we're under her roof." Lafitte gave a crisp nod. "Aye, Captain. Tato Land it is." As Lafitte strode off to relay the orders, Nathan returned to the map. The road ahead was perilous, alliances even more so than battles, but he'd chosen a path that might give them the strength they needed to survive, and one day, to conquer. Lafitte paused to weigh the situation. If Nathan goes after Big Mom, your battle will actually be the easier one. Ours, on the other hand, will be far more difficult. Kaido's beast pirates are almost entirely made up of animal-type devil fruit users. Non-beast fighters are extra, Emily rare. That means their ranks aren't as vast as Big Mom's. Big Mom accepts every race, and her children form the core of her command. She's built a sprawling kingdom of nations with an almost limitless army. Her 4 sweet commanders are each as powerful as one of Kaido's 3 disasters. In other words, although you singled out Big Mom instead of Kaido, and that's a slightly softer target, you'll still face an overwhelmingly large force. If Nathan can strike her down quickly, we'll win this engagement. But if he can't pull it off, we'll be crushed. Simply put, we don't have the numbers to withstand Big Mom's full strength. Nathan's confidence in taking down Big Mom in a matter of hours hadn't wavered, but hours could easily stretch into a full day, and victory was by no means guaranteed. If anyone could slip away unscathed, it was Nathan. Robin and the others, however, weren't so lucky. If trouble found them, escape would be all but impossible. Lost in thought, he scarcely registered when Helding entered the hall. The giant paused before him, lowering his voice. "Captain, I've just heard word from home. A contingent of soldiers from Elbaf is eager to join our cause. Would you consider turning our course toward Elbaf?" Elbaf's pride in the giant corps had only grown since the corps allied with the Ghost Hand pirates. Between Gears' legendary exploits and the fame of the 4 giants, the glory of the old giant pirates was sweeping across the seas once more. Proud young warriors in Elbaf were already dreaming of enlisting under Helding and the others. Nathan blinked, shaking off his reverie. He looked Helding in the eye, weighed the gesture for a moment, and then nodded. "Set sail for Elbaf," he said. "Let's see what reinforcements they can send." Nathan stood on the deck of the Ghost Hand. The 5 giants of Elbaf lined up before him like living battalions. From the moment they'd outgrown childhood, each had endured unrelenting training, forging their bodies into weapons as deadly as any devil fruit ability. Even without supernatural powers, their raw strength surpassed that of pirates, boasting bounties in the tens of millions, nearly on par with the beast pirates' lieutenants. Elites like Hireding could, with a single punch, send a Don Quixote family officer, such as Mahabais, hurtling into the sky. It was precisely this overwhelming might that the Yonko Big Mom coveted above all else. Yet Nathan saw in these giants not only brute force, but unwavering loyalty. As soon as he gave his nod of approval, Hireding, the tallest of the 5, let out a low, rumbling laugh and brought his gauntleted fist to his chest in salute. "On behalf of Elbaf, Captain Nathan, I thank you." Hireding boomed. "We giants will not disappoint you. Our blades and our fists are yours to command." Nathan raised a hand, his eyes reflecting both pride and resolve. "You 5 have already proven yourselves more than capable. I'm thoroughly satisfied with your performance." A wave of relief washed over Hireding's broad features, and the other giants exchanged triumphant looks. Behind them, the lidded flasks of Gorza's milk glowed softly in their holder's belt. Few substances in the New World could match its miraculous healing properties, one reason the Ghost Hand pirates prized it so highly. Lafitte leaned against the rail, his lips curling into a wry smile. "Ho ho ho," he said, voice light. "With Elbaf's warriors at our side, we'll have the upper hand against Big Mom's forces. Our alliance has never been stronger." Crew members, giants and humans alike, murmured in agreement. Nathan turned his gaze to the distant horizon, where storm clouds had begun gathering around Whole Cake Island, Big Mom's fortress of sugar and steel. "Then it's settled," he said evenly. "We set sail at dawn. Let the seas tremble before the combined might of the Ghost Hand pirates and the warriors of Elbaf." A thunderous cheer rose from the deck. Sails were unfurled, weapons were readied, and in that moment of roaring unity, Nathan felt the full weight of his Nen-U alliance. Ahead lay the most perilous stretch of sea any pirate crew could venture, but with giants at his flank, he was more determined than ever to carve his legend into the New World. When Lafitte spoke, Helding froze in mid-breath. We're going after the Big Mom pirates? He repeated, shock and disbelief warring in his tone. Rhodes met his gaze steadily. That's right, our next target is Big Mom. Helding's fist clenched at his side. Ever since that monstrous pirate queen had come within a hair's breadth of destroying Elbaf, he'd sworn to see her defeated. She was his greatest hate, the one he longed to kill above all others. But he also knew how hopeless that fight could be. Even wielding the Thunderfruit, he'd only stand a chance of surviving a clash with her. Back when Nethin, Lafitte, and the others first weighed their options, choosing between the Beast Pirates and Big Mom's fleet, Helding had wanted to press for Big Mom immediately. But his hatred was too personal, and he owed so much to Nethin and the Giant Corps that he couldn't bring himself to make such a bold demand. He'd assumed they'd finish off the Beast Pirates first. Now, though, it was clear. Big Mom's fleet was on the horizon, and they'd all have to face her reckoning together. By Elbaf's name, the Giant Corps will spare no effort in helping you destroy the Big Mom pirates, Helding declared, dropping to one knee. His steady gaze held a resolve none had ever seen before. Lafitte raised an eyebrow in surprise. Was this merely professional solidarity, or did Helding bear a personal grudge against Big Mom? Intelligence reports did confirm that the Giants and Big Mom had been bitter enemies for as long as anyone could remember. Chapter 269, Elbaf, Part 1. Half a month later, the Ghost Hand pirates arrived just off the shores of Elbaf. Thanks to their lightning-fast mobility, they could slip past every naval checkpoint in the world, everywhere except the Navy headquarters and the sacred land of Marijoa. No matter how closely the world government monitored their movements, dispatching a full fleet to corral a 5-Emperor-rank pirate crew in open waters would be far too costly. Back at Elbaf again, Gors murmured, standing tall on the deck and gazing toward the island's towering trees and rolling green hills. Nethin perched comfortably on Gors's broad shoulder, his dark hair ruffling in the wind. At Gors's words, he cocked an eyebrow. You once said it's been over 10 years since you left Elbaf, right? Gors offered a wry smile. Time moves differently for giants. Our lifespans are many times that of humans, and some rivalries, some duels, can stretch on for centuries. A decade is barely the blink of an eye to us. Nethin nodded thoughtfully. True, but it's only been 2 or 3 years since I found you here and brought you aboard the Phantom Hand. For you, perhaps, Gors rumbled. For giants like me or Helding, those few years feel like nothing more than a brief nap. Yet in that short span, you've carved out a reputation for us all. The giant army that shook the world. Even the world government trembles at hearing it now. Nethin grinned, tightening his grip on Gors's coarse fur. We've still got a long way to go, but first, we reclaim some old debts and make some new legends while we're at it. Below them, the Ghost Hand's colors fluttered in the breeze, promising a grand return to the land of towering warriors and ancient oaths. And for the first time in ages, Elbaf would feel the thunder of giants once more. By returning triumphant, Nethin and his comrades not only restored the honor of the Giant Corps, they rekindled the glory of Elbaf itself. Along the shoreline, a throng of giants had gathered, their anticipation etched on every face. For more than 2 weeks, the island had felt strangely empty. Now the impatient buzz of welcome filled the air. Nethin, someone shouted. At once, every giant rose to their feet. Even a handful of youngsters, barely taller than full-grown humans, leapt up, their voices joining the roar. To outsiders they'd still seem colossal, but among giants these were nothing more than children. The clan's teenagers bounced excitedly, eyes shining with admiration for the legendary crew they'd only ever heard about. Is that really you, Nethin? You've grown so much. Nethin stepped off the boat onto the sand, a proud smile tugging at his lips. He reached out a massive hand and playfully tousled the hair of one ecstatic youth. Giants aged slowly. 10 of their years felt like just 3 or 4 human years. So these teens were in their 20s or even 30s by human reckoning, yet still counted as children back home. Behind him, Rhodes and the rest of the crew disembarked, each greeted by thunderous cheers. In that instant, the entire shore seemed to leap to life, a sea of grinning faces celebrating the heroes of Elbaf's youngest warriors. It felt like a scene from long ago. Hasn't it been almost 100 years since the Green Ghost and the Red Ghost came back? Someone joked, glancing around. "This duel is dragging on far too long." At that moment, one of the giant youths noticed a tiny figure perched on Geertz's shoulder. Since the Big Mom incident decades ago, Elbaf had seen precious few humans, and the sight of this one, barely a foot tall, piqued their curiosity. "Who's that?" the youth blurted, eyes wide. Geertz turned, a courteous smile tugging at his lips. "He's our captain," Geertz answered, voice low and respectful. "They call him Ghost Hand Nethin." "Ghost Hand Nethin?" The boy beside him, Arneen, nearly choked on his words. Rumors of Heiderding's ties to the Ghost Hand pirates had already spread throughout Elbaf, and the name Nethin was whispered in every corner. Yet seeing him up close, so small and unassuming, left Arneen momentarily speechless. Nethin lifted his gaze, dark eyes steady. The giant crowd fell silent. In that pause, the centuries of legend and the promise of power loomed larger than any duel, reminding everyone that legends never truly fade from memory. No matter how they looked at Nethin, he hardly resembled the fearsome legend known as Ghost Hand Rhodes. His frame was too slight, far shorter than even the average adult, with arms and legs so thin they seemed ready to snap at the slightest pressure. "Ghost Hand Rhodes," murmured one of the nearby giants, exchanging a baffled glance with his companion. Every one of them knew the fifth emperor of the New World, and that Helding now served under him. In their minds, Rhodes was supposed to be a towering, terrifying force. Yet here he stood, oddly comical. It was like hearing stories of a sea monster that ruled the waves, only to discover a palm-sized fish washed ashore. The giants simply could not reconcile the legend with the boy before them. "Is there some mistake?" one whispered. "This isn't at all what I imagined," another admitted in disbelief. They still hadn't laid eyes on Kaido or Whitebeard, but they all knew that Big Mom had once spent part of her childhood in these caverns, and her stature rivaled theirs. Could someone so slim really possess the legendary strength people whispered about? "It's all right, Lord Geertz," Nethin said, offering a reassuring smile. Geertz had shot him an apologetic look the moment he'd realized Nethin was human. "If I'd never met a giant, I'd think the same. We're a small race, and stories of our power do sound far-fetched." Before anyone else could voice more doubts, Heiderding, Nethin's massive first mate, stomped forward. His voice thundered through the chamber. "Enough murmuring. Our captain's strength outstrips mine tenfold. If any of you still question it, challenge me. Twice over, if you like." Giants rarely lied. It simply wasn't in their nature. So when Heiderding proclaimed that his own might was but a fraction of Nethin's, the assembled clansmen exchanged astonished glances. No one doubted Heiderding's word, yet to hear a benchwarmer admit such disparity, it was almost unbelievable. "Are you certain?" one of the elders rumbled. Heiderding squared his broad shoulders. "As my life depends on it." Silence fell. In that tense stillness, the giants realized that their judgment of Nethin had been premature. And though they still found it hard to credit, they knew better than to challenge a man backed by such unwavering conviction, and a first mate willing to stake everything on his captain's strength. Nethin, a great giant named Ward, forced his way through the crowd. He paused, glancing first at Rhodes and then fixing his gaze on Nethin. Ward was virtually the same age as Nethin, and the two of them had been rivals in every contest since childhood. When Nethin finally took to the seas, Ward remained in Elbaf, but despite Nethin's growing fame across the world, there was no hint of jealousy in Ward's eyes. He was proud of his old friend's achievements, though that familiar spark of competition still glowed in his heart. "It's been over 10 years since our last bout," Nethin said coolly, lifting his chin. "Hard to believe, isn't it?" Ward's lips curved into a challenge. "Believe me, it's you I remember beating most of all. You've been away too long. Your confidence has gotten awfully big." With that, he strode forward, eager to test Nethin's skill once more. Around them, the other giants respectfully parted, forming a wide circle. All of them were keen to see just how much stronger the seafaring Nethin had become. Chapter 270, How Vast the World Can Be, Part 2. "Watch out," Nethin warned as he charged at Helding, settling into a fighting stance. His fist cut through the air like a whirlwind, but Helding didn't flinch. With a cold, unreadable expression, he simply stood his ground, refusing any block or dodge. Nethin's punch slammed into Helding's face, but instead of connecting with flesh, it struck, Nothing. Crack, a flash of white lightning danced across Helding's cheek and jaw, then vanished as quickly as it came. When the glow died out, his face was completely unmarked, as if untouched by the blow. Nethin froze in mid-attack, stunned. He hadn't expected his best strike to miss entirely. Around them, a cluster of giants stared in disbelief. Some, having sailed the high seas, recognized the signature of thunder and lightning. "Is that a devil fruit power, or something born of nature?" one murmured. "Thunder," another whispered. "Helding wields thunder itself. No wonder they call him the Thunder Giant." Shock and awe rippled through the onlookers. As Nethin regains his composure, they realize just how formidable their opponent really is, and how much greater the world's mysteries might be. Even Yorulu, the 400-year-old elder of the giant clan, his white hair and beard framing a weathered face, opened his cloudy eyes in stunned silence. Before him, Ward's fist sliced through the air as he hovered in midair. Recovering his balance, Ward stared at his own gauntleted hand in amazement, then fixed his gaze on Helding. "I see now," he murmured, voice low. "No wonder they call you Thunder." His brow darkened at the thought of such raw power. Even a giant like himself could not dismiss the might of lightning. He clenched his fists tighter, awakening the sleeping strength in his muscles, and let out a roar that shook the clearing. "Elbaf, the gun!" Ward shouted, thrusting his fist forward in a crackling blast. A roaring shockwave raced toward Helding. "Lightning strike!" For the first time, Helding's unflinching eyes flickered. Without hesitation, he slammed his own fist forward. Brilliant arcs of thunder erupted, coiling around his gauntlet and meeting Ward's energy head-on. Crack! Crackle! Sparks flew as lightning met raw force. In the flash of colliding power, Ward's Elbaf gun technique shattered, and the backlash slammed him full in the chest. Jet-black smoke curled from his body, drifting into the air with the stench of singed hair. Ward's legs wavered. He stumbled, a final wheeze escaping his lips as the charged smoke dissipated around him. Half a second later, Ward's body slumped to the ground, the impact echoing through the clearing. With a single, precise strike, he was defeated. A hush fell over the gathered giants. Ward was renowned as a fearsome combatant. He'd sparred with Hireding countless times, often coming out on top. Yet now he hadn't even managed to block that one blow. He was down in an instant. Geertz's expression remained calm as she watched Ward lie motionless, lightning-like energy still crackling around him. She understood just how far Hireding had come, and she knew the source of his power, Nethin. That blessing was a favor she could never fully repay. All she could do was give her utmost in service to him. Taking a steadying breath, Geertz extended her hand and flicked her wrist. A tendril of pearly white light sprang forth, weaving into Ward's body as an emergency healing spell. The clan's chief physician hurried forward, laid a gentle hand on Ward's forehead, and checked his vital signs. After a tense moment, he nodded and let out a relieved sigh. "He'll recover," the doctor said. "Move him to the rear for further treatment." As the healers carried Ward away, the giants turned back to Hireding. Their faces had shifted from shock to something nearer awe. Today's Hireding was nothing like the man they remembered from years past. Nethin sat perched on Gorz's broad shoulder, arms casually crossed in his lap, his expression as calm as a moonlit pond. Around him, the giants of Elbaf exchanged awed glances. They had just witnessed Helding claim that Nethin's strength was 10 times his own, and none of them doubted it. After all, Helding could fell Ward with a single strike. If that was Helding's power, how vast must Nethin's be? "I've heard Goals speak often of this land," Nethin said in a gentle, almost lyrical voice. "Giants are born warriors, each one forged by battle and honor, yet even your fiercest blows fall short of what I need." He nodded toward the prone form of Ward, carried away at the edge of the assembly, proof enough that the giant's might alone would not suffice. A hush fell over the gathered titans. What force lay coiled within this slender young man, stronger than even Helding? Under their expectant gazes, Nethin gently pushed off from Gorz's shoulder. In a single fluid motion, he rose above the giant ranks, hovering in midair as though gravity were but a suggestion. Then, with the soft hiss of steel, he drew the demon sword Murasame from its scabbard, the blade's crimson edge glinting ominously in the twilight. Silence reigned as every eye fixed on him. Nethin, the quiet outsider who now held the fate of Elbaf in his hand. Nathan hovered above the deck, Murasame, his gleaming blade, raised effortlessly in his hand. His voice, low and confident, cut through the morning air. Do you know how vast this world truly is? If not, I'll show you. With that, he swept the sword in an elegant arc toward the endless sea. The moment the blade touched the water, an explosive boom echoed across the waves. In an instant, the ocean surged upward, folding into itself like a colossal waterfall. A wall of water, thousands of meters high, soared toward the sky, its roaring cascade stretching beyond the clouds, bridging sea and heavens in one breathtaking sweep. Above this towering torrent, enormous sea creatures glided and thrashed in panicked confusion. Leviathan-sized fish and the legendary sea kings fought to stay aloft on currents they had never known. Their great eyes reflected utter bewilderment, as if the ocean itself had betrayed them. On deck, every giant warrior froze in astonishment. Their hands loosened on spears and halberds, their hearts pounded beneath iron breastplates. In the midst of this thunderous display, Nathan's silhouette appeared minuscule, no more than a dark speck against the cataract of water. Yet no one doubted who held dominion here. That is a captain's power, murmured Halding, voice hushed with awe. I have a long way to go. Beside him, Geard stared upward, admiration shining in his eyes. Below them, the waterfall sea thundered on, its every drop a testament to Nathan's indomitable will and to the boundless scale of the world he commanded. Such power! Even the giants wouldn't be able to muster this in a lifetime at sea, the fisherman muttered, staring in disbelief. Our captain's gone off the deep end again. Luo shook his head with a sigh. Even if it's just to scare off the giants, this is way overkill. Robin cocked his head, a playful smile tugging at his lips. Overkill? Who put him in charge anyway? High above them, the colossal waterfall paused in midair for 2 long seconds, then thundered down, smashing into the ocean. The impact churned the sea into a frenzy, sending a towering wave hurtling toward Elbaf. Nathan planted his feet firmly on deck and swept aside the surging swell with a crisp arc of murai. He retrieved his blade, turned his back on the cascading water, and let the wave crash harmlessly around him. But before the next roar of water could hit, Shiryu of the Rain exhaled a plume of smoke, shook his head dismissively, and leapt from the railing. From his sash he drew the second-generation spectre, its blade cloaked in an aura of bone-chilling cold, and drove it straight into the onrushing wall of water. At the ripple's heart, the sea froze solid, radiating outward in a split-second transformation that turned the entire wave into a towering iceberg. Shiryu sheathed his sword with a satisfied flourish. That was almost too easy. Nathan's key. En's senses absorbed every movement behind him. Inwardly, he acknowledged Shiryu of the Rain's timely intervention, but his face remained calm and indifferent. From his lofty vantage point, he simply watched the towering giants of Elbaf below. Chapter 271 Trading, Part 3. Nathan and his companions had been anchored off Elbaf for 10 days. When Count Helding first put out the call for giants willing to join his crew, only 3 stepped forward. But the instant he announced their next objective would be to go after Charlotte Linlin, Big Mom herself, 5 more giants rushed to enlist. 8 giants in one force already counted as a small army, even without devil fruit powers. Among them, Yura and Shinjuo were true heavyweights, enough to handle ordinary Don Quixote family officers, while the others, though still formidable, ranked a notch lower. With Helding's reputation now cemented as leader of the giant clan, they could probably recruit more, but Nathan felt 8 was plenty. Devil fruits were too scarce to hope for more than a handful of useful powers, and the supply was only going to dwindle from here. Standing on the quarterdeck, Nathan watched the sea and formulated his next move. He glanced at Lafitte beside him and said, I have an idea for getting more devil fruits without going on any wild fruit hunts. Spread word that we've seized the hearts of certain celestial dragons, and let it reach the world government's ears that those hearts are our bargaining chips. When their envoys finally show up, you'll agree to hand the hearts back, but only in exchange for devil fruits. That way, we trade what they value most for what we value most. Lafitte gave a slow nod, already picturing the shock on the world government's faces. Nathan turned back to the horizon, confident that a little bluff could reap them the devil fruits they so desperately needed. Nethan watched the crystalline sphere of Musgarod's heart glimmer in the dim light of Lafitte's cabin. To most people, a celestial dragon's heart was worthless, dead tissue after death, but Nethan knew different. With the right devil fruit, even this remnant could be made to pulse with a last, desperate spark of power. He couldn't let such a prize go to waste. Lafitte's lips curved into a wicked smile as he pocketed the heart and stepped back into his cabin's shadows. 3 days had passed since the ghost hand pirates had slipped away from Elbaf. Now, through a concealed transponder implanted in CP0 Subcaptain Wulongxing, the world government was calling. The line crackled to life. A deep, authoritative voice cut through the static. "What do you want?" Nethan exchanged a glance with Lafitte, who raised a single eyebrow and grinned in the darkness. It shouldn't have surprised them that the Gorosei were interested in Musgarod's remains. Few things in the world stirred more dread than a fallen celestial dragon. Still, the 5 elders had no choice but to negotiate. Musgarod's heart was irreplaceable, no matter how distasteful their last meeting with Inspector Rhodes had been. Lafitte pressed the transponder to his ear. "If you want this heart back," he said, his voice hushed and oily, "you'll have to trade us devil fruits." Silence greeted him on the other end, an expectant hush. Nethan could almost see the Gorosei's cold smiles, the way their eyes must have flicked between one another, debating whether to answer a pirate's bargain. Finally, one elder cleared his throat. "You dare demand devil fruits from us?" Lafitte chuckled. "Oh, I dare everything. Name your fruits, and prepare to hand them over. I'll be waiting." He snapped the cabin door shut. Behind them, the mists of the Grand Line swirled as the ghost hand pirates' ship sailed on into the night. The Gorosei, for their part, would soon discover that no wasn't in Nethan's vocabulary. And as long as Musgarod's heart beat within Lafitte's grasp, they would have no choice but to pay, even if it meant robbing their own vaults of the world's most coveted powers. One of the 5 old stars pounded his fist on the table, eyes blazing. "Who the hell are you, Ghost Hand?" he demanded. Lafitte leaned back in his chair, a slow, predatory smile playing on his lips. "A man without a name isn't worth your trouble," he replied coolly. "And as for our captain, he's rarwise engaged, taking a bath, in fact." The Admiral's face flushed crimson. "Damn it," he roared, slamming his palm so hard the table rattled. "What about our intelligence?" Another of the old stars spoke up, voice low and icy. "They've sailed for Elbaf." At the word Elbaf, the room fell into an uneasy hush. "They're recruiting a new giant crew there," the first admiral continued, his tone clipped. "They'll need devil fruits to bolster their army." "Giants bred with single-minded loyalty," muttered a third old star, his knuckles whitening as he gripped his chair. "We once considered obliterating Elbaf, but we can't. The island is defended by giant vice-admirals in the Navy, and other giants serve the world government. To strike Elbaf would mean turning our own forces against ourselves. And Nethan, he's no guarantee of success. It'd be like cutting off our own arm." Lafitte's grin widened. He snapped his fingers, bringing the others back to the present. "That's exactly why we need to keep our eyes on them," he said softly. "Devil fruits are trifles to the celestial dragons, playthings even. But if one falls into Nethan's hands—" He let the threat hang in the charged air. No one spoke as the 5 admirals exchanged grim looks, each grasping the deadly stakes of what might come next. The world trembles at the mere mention of the giant core's power. Tales of the devil fruit, eating giants, and their ruthless might have spread to every corner of the globe. At long last, the 5 elders of the world government have reached a moment of decision. In a quiet corridor of Marijois, Lafitte leaned against the marble wall, arms folded and face unreadable. He could hear the muffled voices of the elders drifting down the hall. No doubt they were still hashing out the terms. He wasn't in a hurry. Let them argue. The outcome suited him either way. A few minutes later, Lafitte entered the gilded council chamber. He offered a slight knowing smile as he approached the semicircle of seated dignitaries. "So," he asked, "a verdict yet?" Negotiating with the world government was always a gamble. For Lafitte and his allies, however, there existed no true loss, only the prospect of great gain. If they walked away empty-handed, at least they would walk away free. The 5 elders exchanged terse glances. Their outrage at dealing with pirates fought against their duty to the government. Finally, the eldest among them, a gaunt man with steel-gray eyes, composed himself and spoke in a low, measured tone. "Very well. Since you insist, let us speak of quantity. As the world government, we harbor a considerable treasury of devil fruits. Surely surrendering 10 or even 8 would not deplete our reserves." He leaned back, his lips curling into a thin, hollow laugh. "Ho ho ho, is that agreeable to you?" At once, another elder, his voice a rumble like distant thunder, cut in sharply. "Don't delude yourselves. You're pirates, and augmenting your strength carries a high price. The maximum we're willing to offer in return is a single devil fruit, not one more." Lafitte's smirk deepened, though his gaze remained cool and unblinking. He had foreseen their reluctance. Now, with the terms laid bare, the real game could begin. Lafitte let out a low chuckle. "Our captain won't be pleased. He may even feel compelled to take extreme measures." "Is that a threat?" Wu Laoxing replied coolly. "Not at all," Lafitte said quickly. "Just a fair warning. You see, our captain is merciful. He hates needless bloodshed. What he really wants is a devil fruit, but specifically a logia." "A logia?" Wu Laoxing and the other 4 stars exchanged incredulous glances. "Impossible!" One of them scoffed. Everyone aboard knew how valuable logia fruits were. Even a weaker user could become all but untouchable to ordinary foes. To offer anything comparable, you'd need at least 2 paramecia fruits, or 3 zoans. "How you arrange the exchange is up to you," Lafitte continued. "Whether you accept or walk away, that's your decision." He smiled, tapped his mouth, den mushi, and ended the call. Across the deck, Rhodes leaned against the bulkhead, arms folded. As Lafitte slipped the handset into his pocket, Rhodes raised an eyebrow. "Interesting proposal," he observed. "It seems so," Lafitte agreed with a shrug. Rhodes straightened. "All right, you'll negotiate with the 5 old stars from here on out. I have better things to do than haggle over devil fruits." He glanced at Lafitte. "Don't disappoint me." Nethan leaned back in his chair, watching Lafitte with a wry smile. "Keep in mind," he said softly, "that the 5 old stars are only the government's executive corps. There are layers above them, superiors they themselves must answer to. It's only natural." Lafitte chuckled. "True, but whether the government will actually go along with us, who can say?" Nithin met his gaze coolly. "Even if they do agree, they won't just hand over the devil fruit without strings attached." Before Lafitte could reply, the world government's secure line buzzed to life again. Lafitte lifted the phone. This time it wasn't one of the 5 old stars on the other end, but a voice deeper, more official. "Master Wu Laoxing has approved the trade of the natural devil fruit," the voice announced. "We must now designate a meeting place." Lafitte's lips curved into a mocking grin. "By all means, suggest it, but if you name Mary Joa or Marine Headquarters, don't expect a trade. That'd be an ambush." The government official's tone turned icy. "We will not propose Mary Joa or Marine HQ. Equally, you pirates cannot pick the location. Do not forget, you are the most untrustworthy of rogues." Lafitte set the phone down and glanced over at Rhodes, his expression unreadable. Nethan stiffened beside him, ready for whatever the world government might throw their way. "It looks like you've only pasted a brief excerpt rather than the full chapter. Could you please provide the complete chapter text you'd like rewritten? That way I can ensure I capture every plot point, character detail, and narrative beat in a polished, idiomatic English version." Chapter 272, Crisis Looms, Part 4. The world government's willingness to deal in Logia-class devil fruits came as a genuine surprise to Nethan. He'd expected them to offer up 2 paramecia, or maybe 3 zoans, certainly not any serious Logia powers. After all, the government would never part with their top-tier elemental fruits, the kind that could rival the famed smoke fruit. Yet Logias remain the pinnacle of devil fruit strength. They need little training to unleash catastrophic force. Few paramecia can match them, and most zoans must still awaken their full potential, risking disastrous mismatches against a Logia's raw might. In the end, Nethan and the world government forged a plan. Their rendezvous would take place in the New World on the Isle of Flame, a volcanic stronghold not on the front line near the Red Soil continent, but conveniently close to the Navy's G2 command base. 3 active volcanoes dominated its jagged coastline, promising both spectacle and danger. Lafitte studied the chart, then carefully marked the island's coordinates. His thoughtful expression confirmed what Nethan already knew. The coming exchange would ignite forces neither side could afford to underestimate. The stretch of sea claimed by Rhodes includes 7 or 8 islands, and Flaming Island is just one among them. Still, the government must have chosen this particular isle for a reason. On the surface, its appeal is straightforward. It sits closer to the naval branch's base and to the Red Soil mainland. Beyond that, however, nobody really knows. There's almost no reliable intelligence on Flaming Island itself. "Are you seriously going to risk everything on this deal with the government?" the fisherman asked, his eyes narrowing. "They're not going to let us waltz in and snatch the Nature Department's devil fruit without a fight." Nethan snorted. "If they're willing to bring out the fruit in front of us, then why shouldn't I go for it?" He tilted his head, considering. "And I don't need the whole crew backing me. I can handle this alone." Right now, Nethan had his twisted space ability at his command. He knew he couldn't stand toe-to-toe with 2 fleet admirals simultaneously, but neither could they pin him down with any certainty. Even if Kijikiabu and Admiral Akainu showed up together, Nethan was confident he could slip away. Top-tier fighters are notoriously hard to put down. No one's managed to kill Kaido, and Rhodes himself is in that same rarefied league. You might bruise him, you might even force him into retreat, but defeating him outright, let alone killing him, remains nearly impossible. That knowledge was Nethan's greatest advantage, boldness tempered by the certainty that, should the worst happen, he could vanish into the folds of his own warped space and live to fight another day. Nethan? Alone? Shiryu of the Rain straightened, studying him with a serious gaze. Robin shook her head. "No, it's far too dangerous for you to go by yourself." Nethan smiled softly and reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from Robin's cheek. "I know every move against the world government carries risk," he said. "But consider this. If we all go in together, they'll pour in overwhelming force. At least 2 admirals and 2 vice-admirals, possibly even a full squadron of flag officers, plus a detachment of elite Cypher Paul operatives. Our chances of breaking through would be almost nil. And even if we escape, someone will get hurt." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over them. "If I go alone, on the other hand, any danger falls solely on me. With my space distortion ability, no one can chase me, and there's no such thing as siege or pursuit. I'll slip in, do what's needed, and slip back out again." A hush fell over the room. Shiryu of the Rain and Robin exchanged glances, but offered no more objections. As captain, Nethan's decision was final and unchallenged. Robin didn't argue, at least not out loud, when Nethan insisted on going alone. But the moment they were back in her quarters, she tried once more to dissuade him. "If your strength were greater, I'd assign someone to go with you," she said, pacing the room. "But as it stands, your abilities aren't quite at the level I'd need. And, well, you can't be certain the government hasn't developed a way to nullify your powers. It's not that simple." Nethan listened without flinching. He had no intention of taking anyone along, not even fishermen. If there was one thing he knew, it was how to stay flexible in the field. Bringing a partner might actually endanger them both. Fire Island lay off the coast like a molten crown. 3 volcanoes pierced the sky, 1 dormant, 2 still simmering, though only one had erupted in decades. The air was furnace-hot, yet bizarre. Alien flora clung stubbornly to the cracked earth. It was the perfect ghostly wilderness for the mission ahead. At the very edge of the island, at the base of a simmering volcano, Provisional General Chadolphin stood alone. A thin bead of sweat traced his temple as he stared out to sea, no ships in sight. He sighed, bent his head in frustration, then raised the wooden box he'd been guarding and studied it carefully. With a deep breath, he eased open the lid. Inside lay the devil fruit he'd risked everything to secure. Its surface was a pale, almost icy blue, etched with writhing, flame-like patterns that danced across its skin. There was no mistaking it, a naturally grown devil fruit, and the one Chadolphin had come all this way to find. Before he could brace himself, a quiet voice came from behind. "Is that it?" Chadolphin didn't turn. He'd known this moment would come. His uncanny knack for predicting the future had already prepared him. "Yes," he replied softly. "That's the one." Nethan stepped into view, his expression calm and unreadable as he gazed down at the fruit in the box. He was young, but something in his cool confidence told Cha Dolphin he was more than capable of dealing with whatever power this fruit might confer. With a flick of his wrist, Cha Dolphin lifted a cigarette to his lips and inhaled. The glow of the ember cast fleeting shadows across his face. He exhaled a plume of smoke and turned at last to Nethin, a mixture of curiosity and something sharper, disapproval sharpening his gaze. "You didn't have to come here," Cha Dolphin said, voice low. "You could have joined the Navy and been handed this fruit on a silver platter. Instead, you choose to hunt pirates on your own, dragging them all the way to this godforsaken volcano just for a chance to claim it yourself." He tossed the cigarette butt aside, crushing it underfoot. "Why go to all that trouble? Is this the pride of the celestial dragons, making everything so dramatic?" Nethin's lips curved in a slight, almost imperceptible smile. He lowered his hood, letting the volcanic breeze stir his dark hair. "Power isn't handed out," he replied quietly. "You have to seize it yourself." With that, he lifted the box, meeting Cha Dolphin's wary eyes. The promise of what lay inside was written clearly on both their faces. Today, the world would change. T. Dolphin studied the beating heart in Nethin's palm and murmured, "We need confirmation." Nethin said nothing, his face a calm mask, but his fingers tightened around the organ. T. Dolphin's lip twitched. Before his surveillance bug even signaled, he'd already pulled it from his pocket and clipped it to his ear. The moment it crackled to life, he listened intently. A few whispered seconds later, he unplugged it and nodded. All clear. He eased the bug away, lifted the devil fruit from its wooden crate, and motioned for Nethin to face him. "On my count, 1, 2, 3, we each throw our piece. Whoever drops their catch loses." Nethin positioned the heart carefully. T. Dolphin met his gaze without a flicker of doubt. 1, 2, 3. In perfect unison, T. Dolphin sent the devil fruit spinning through the air just as Nethin flung the pulsing heart. Nethin's precognitive edge and T. Dolphin's lightning reflexes took over. Nethin snatched the devil fruit, and T. Dolphin caught the still-beating heart. Their objects swapped cleanly in mid-flight, settling any question of bluff or trickery. The heart was genuine, the devil fruit intact, and both men had proven the prowess of their hands. Nethin turned the devil fruit over in his hand, eyes alight with curiosity. From its familiar ridged shape, he was certain it was a genuine Logia-type devil fruit, yet its true power remained a mystery. He'd have to bring it back to Robin for proper identification. Frustrated but determined, he tucked the fruit into his coat. Beside him, the T. Dolphin, having retrieved the fruit, made no attempt to examine it further. With a quiet chuff, it slid the devil fruit into its own pocket, then fixed Nethin with a grave, unblinking stare. Before Nethin could respond, a sudden whoosh of air tore across the rooftop. Two figures burst into view, rushing from stage left to stage right and pinning him in the middle. One shimmered with brilliant golden light, Admiral Kizaru. The other wore a crisp navy cloak edged in pale pink, Tautu, the Navy's enforcer. In an instant, Nethin realized he was surrounded. Crisis had arrived. Chapter 273, Calm, Part 1. A whirlwind of petals and light, like flowers dancing with 1,000 spirits, filled the void. Tautu gripped the famed sword Jimpiro in both hands and unleashed the full power of a master bladesman. Each swing of the blade cleaved the air itself, carving the emptiness into razor-sharp arcs. Opposite him, Kizaru's eyes gleamed as he fired volley after volley of condensed laser beams. The brilliant shafts of light converged on Nethin with blinding speed, sealing off every angle of retreat. Yet Nethin stood perfectly still. He closed his eyes as Tautu's blade and Kizaru's lasers slammed into him simultaneously. Boom, boom, boom! Thunderous explosions reverberated through the emptiness. When the smoke cleared, Nethin emerged at the edge of the blast as if he'd never even been struck. He slipped the devil fruit he'd eaten back into his pocket and drifted forward like a phantom. From Tautu and Kizaru's perspective, their combined assault had appeared to pass harmlessly through Nethin's body, only to clash violently in midair. The spectacular roars they'd heard were not his cries of pain, but the furious collision of sword and laser. Nethin vanished before their very eyes, as though the fabric of space had been torn and reknit around him, bypassing his body entirely. T. Dolphin, who had predicted such a move, scowled in frustration. Foreknowledge offered no defense. With a grimace, he hurled everything he had at Nethan, but to no avail. Unfazed, Nethan continued his measured stride toward the shore. Blades slashed and laser blasts roared, yet not a hair on his head stirred, nor a stitch on his clothes rippled. T-Dolphin and his comrades wielded powerful armament haki, but even their combined strength fell just short of Kaido's legendary force. Those minute gaps proved fatal against Nethan's unyielding spatial barrier. As he reached the water's edge, a low, resonant command split the air. Ice Age! In an instant, the waves solidified into a vast sheet of ice, racing toward the beach. Through the swirling frost emerged the towering form of Aokiji, the master of sea ice. The 4 top admirals of the Navy, 2 serving and 2 reserve, had never assembled like this before. Their combined power dwarfed any threat in the New World. Big Mom would be pulverized under their barrage, Kaido himself would be pinned in place, and even Whitebeard would tremble at the might of 4 admirals striking in unison. Form up! Kizaru's calm voice rang out as streaks of light gathered beneath his feet. Axes ready! Fujitora's sword glowed with gravitational power. Freeze him solid! Aokiji murmured, drawing moisture from the air into coils of glacial energy. Volcanic pressure, full force! Akainu snarled, and the ground beneath them hissed. In an instant, Aokiji's biting cold condensed into a jagged sheet of ice that slithered across the deck, wrapping around Nethan's ankles. At the same moment, Kizaru's laser beams, Fujitora's crushing gravity, and Akainu's molten magma converged on the same point. But Nethan barely even blinked. He lifted one boot, crushed the ice beneath him, and took a single lazy step forward, on water frozen only moments ago. Not a hair on his head was out of place. No hint of pain or surprise flickered across his face. A stunned hush fell over the admirals. Kizaru's hand wavered on his lightsaber. Impossible. Aokiji's usually placid eyes snapped open. Our intel said he had strong defenses, but nothing this, or he'd have fallen before we even gathered. Fujitora's sword wavered in its sheath. Akainu clenched a fist, magma crackling around his knuckles. They could all sense Nethan's haki, strong enough to challenge a Yonko, yet every strike they launched disintegrated in midair or slid harmlessly off him. Even now, as blasts of energy and firestorm after shockwave followed in rapid succession, boom, boom, Nethan advanced in leisurely strides, utterly unharmed. The 4 admirals exchanged grim, incredulous glances. They had toes to crush titans. They could have and keep the 4 emperors at bay. Yet here stood one man, and they could neither harm him nor halt his approach. And as Nethan closed the distance, the tension on the frozen deck screamed one terrible truth. Today, the Navy's greatest champions had finally met someone beyond their control. Nethan moved through Qingji's ice attacks as if they were nothing but mist. Whether she raised towering walls of frost or hurled massive spheres of icicles, every assault passed right through him. No impact, no slowing. Frustration flared across her face. She unleashed one powerful spell after another, roaring ice missiles, spiraling shard storms, only to watch each dissipate before they could reach their mark. Finally, she ground to a halt, pupils pinning in pure disbelief. Above them, Kizaru soared into the sky, then unleashed an 8-foot Chongo orb forged of dense, jade-tinted ice. The sphere plummeted across the frozen sea with a thunderous roar. The impact sent crystalline shards flying in every direction. The air shimmered with fracture lines of frost and shattering ice. Yet Nethan remained untouched. Calmly, he stepped out of the bombardment zone as if strolling in sunlight rather than a hail of ice. Around him, onlookers fell silent. This was no small feat. On the distant ice, the figure known as Yellow Monkey flared into golden light and landed heavily. His voice shook as he whispered, "He's actually walking away." Terror laced each word. Nethan made no counterattack. A twisted spatial barrier separated inside from outside. To strike through it, he'd have to dismantle the wall completely, an act that would hand Qingji and Kizaru the very opening they needed. But there was no need. He simply stood, awaiting their next move. Nethan's casual stride past the 4 supreme commanders, 2 alternate generals and 2 admirals, had sent shockwaves through every watcher's heart. Under their vigilant eyes, he simply walked on, unchallenged, intent on reaching the open sea. Such brazen indifference to his enemies was enough to shake the world's faith in its strongest protectors. Tao Tu felt her blood boil. She tightened her fingers on the sword's hilt. every fiber of her swordsman's pride ablaze. No warrior despised more than being ignored, and the sight of Nethin treating her as though she were invisible drove her resolve to a fever pitch. She drew in a steady breath and let her sword intent crystallize into a single, formidable point. The air around her blade shimmered with combative arrogance, and in her mind she felt the old barriers shatter. A power, one even greater than the famed Shiryu of the rain, surged to life within her. Heart sword flow, cherry blossom tribulation, she intoned, her voice a clarion call that scattered delicate pink petals into the air. In an instant she was gone, her form a streak of motion that bent the very space between them. The blade cut through the distorted barrier as though it were mist, aiming unerringly for Nethin's heart. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath as sword met flesh. The petals fluttered away, and Tautu knew she had unleashed everything she possessed. This was the limit of her power. Nethin watched the sword's aura tear through space itself, domineering, yes, but ultimately hollow. Breaking his spatial barrier was as far as her blade could go. It couldn't truly wound him. Yet when Tautu's sword suddenly pierced that shimmering wall and drove toward his heart, Nethin's dull eyes finally sparked to life. That barrier was the culmination of his maximum twisted space technique. If she could shatter it, her strike must exceed Shinji Kiabu's famed attack by at least a hair. But of course, it was the way of swordsmen to sacrifice defense for unparalleled offense. Ding! Rather than pausing to rebuild his barrier, Nethin struck back. His right hand blinked with jet-black energy as he flicked his fingers at the charging blade. The very act of breaching his space wall had drained almost all the sword's momentum. Under Nethin's counterstroke, the distorted space shuddered and expelled the spent weapon. Tautu's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Pathetic," she whispered. Then, gathering her own power, she called out, "Witness my true art, heaven-soaring cloud sword." A surge of crackling energy enveloped her as she prepared her next, even deadlier assault. Shinji and Kizaru saw that Peach Rabbit's strike had managed to crack Nethin's strange barrier. Sensing an opening, they immediately joined forces and launched their own attack, only to have it shatter harmlessly against the spatial wall. It passed right by Nethin, as if he weren't even there, like water running off a duck's back. The defense was perfect. T-Dolphin, who had witnessed this before, didn't bother piling on. He only shook his head. Peach Rabbit's blow had revealed that Nethin's barrier, though formidable, wasn't absolutely invulnerable. To breach it required either an exceptionally high-grade weapon or an overwhelmingly powerful technique, just as Tautu's extreme swordsmanship had done moments earlier. Apart from that, no assault could penetrate his guard. As naturally gifted fighters, Shinji and Kizaru excelled in sensing and evading attacks, but they lacked the specialized armament haki needed to break such a defense. Chapter 274, 2 Billion Berry Bounty, Part 2. If only Garp were here, T-Dolphin thought, letting out a silent sigh. In fact, Garp had already been notified of this siege, but when it came to Rhodes's affairs, the old Marine simply refused to get involved. That left Admiral Kizaru and Captain Shinji Kiabu to press the attack on Rhodes, hoping to force Tautu into a new level of combat prowess. Under Rhodes's tutelage, Tautu had just shattered her previous ceiling. Buoyed by the breakthrough, she threw herself back into the fight with electrifying ferocity. In straight-up striking power, she now even outmatched Shinji by a hair. Her overall strength, too, had soared to meet the green juvenile yellow monkey standard in full. Boom, boom, boom. Despite seeing their blows hardly make a dent, Shinji and Kizaru kept hammering away. In this world, there is no such thing as a completely pointless attack. Just as an expert armament haki can casually repel cannon fire, that doesn't render artillery useless. It still saps endurance and chips away at one's resolve. And as T-Dolphin noted with narrowed eyes, Tautu's ability to breach Nethin's unusual defense revealed the undeniable truth. Nethin's guard, impressive as it was, wasn't truly impenetrable. Under the relentless onslaught of Shinji Kiabu's bombardment, Tautu slipped into a trance, her mind fusing completely with her blade. For 2 suspended seconds, she stood motionless, gripping the hilt with both hands. Then, without warning, her eyes flared with an otherworldly light, as if her very pupils had become streaks of steel. "Heart sword flow," she intoned. A surge of power, unlike any before, roared through her sword. In a heartbeat, Tautu's blade cleaved upward, its force rending the very fabric of space. The distorted void around it slowed to a crawl, shredded into chaos as the sword tore through the barrier. Though the spatial wall fought back, quivering and warping under the assault, her strike shattered it into fragmented echoes. On the far side of the ruptured barrier, Nethin braced himself. Tautu's blade descended in a devastating arc, an amalgam of sword pressure and brilliant shifting hues. Sparks flew as steel met steel. With a casual flick of his wrist, Nethin deflected the blow, sending her sword skittering off to the side. He regarded her with curious, flickering eyes. A breakthrough in the midst of battle? I didn't think I'd see the day. Nethin's eyes stilled into calm focus. The instant Kizaru's and Qingji's assaults waned, he sealed the spatial rift behind him, took a single measured step, and reappeared a full kilometer away. That kind of teleportation was pushing his limits. Press on recklessly, and he'd risk capsizing his own power, like a boat without a paddle. It was time to pull back. In this world, devil fruit abilities such as the barrier fruit could stave off an attack from a general whose haki hadn't reached its peak. But against a fully awakened general, a lone barrier was no match. Nethin stood no chance facing 4 generals at once, and even felling one of them in mere seconds was nearly impossible. Yet his spatial wall was extraordinary, a force akin to the legendary divine power of Uchiha Obito. Only jutsu that warped space itself, or the 6 paths technique said to obliterate dimensions, could breach it. Every other strike simply glanced off, nullified by that godlike resilience. A wind whine tore through the air as Kizaru transformed into a streak of golden light, lunging toward Nethin's last known position. But when the Admiral arrived, Nethin had already folded the space beneath his feet and vanished once more. Nethin's trail had already vanished over the horizon before Kizaru dared to follow. He shook his head, unwilling to pursue the rookie on his own, and reluctantly fell back. The 4 of them, Kizaru, Qingji, Tautu, and Meiyu, reformed their formation in grim silence. Only Tautu's shoulders twitched with frustration. The others exchanged uneasy glances. "We set up a perfect ambush to trap the ghost hand pirates," Tauto finally said, voice tight. But in the end, only Nethin showed, and he just strolled through our lines like we weren't even here. By the time we reacted, he disappeared without a trace. Qingji rubbed his temples. This is turning into a real headache. No one can withstand Whitebeard's tremor fruit head-on. Kaido's body can't be killed. Shanks's sheer presence counters any devil fruit power. Each Emperor of the Sea wields a singular advantage. And now Nethin has become one of them. He paused, meeting each of their eyes in turn. His ability to create an unbreakable spatial barrier and teleport at will makes him incredibly flexible. There's no conventional way to stop him. We're not just dealing with another pirate. We're up against a new emperor. Nethin faced down 4 admirals and yet had retreated with an almost casual grace, his presence somehow more unnerving than even Kaido or Whitebeard. The air between the 4 naval commanders was thick with tension. Just then, reinforcements who'd been stationed farther off finally arrived. From a distance, they made out Admirals Qingji and Kizaru standing on the frozen sea. "Over there? Did it end already?" called out Major General Liang, astonished. Lieutenant General Shen squinted. "It seems only 1 pirate from the Ghost Hand crew was left," he observed. Alone, he wouldn't stand a chance against Tautucha the Dolphin and Qingji the Yellow Monkey. Encirclement, bombardment, done. Under their orders, dozens of Marines swarmed forward, even pulling the stone shackles from the sea tower in readiness. But as they drew closer, the admirals exchanged baffled looks. On the ice stood only 4 figures, Qingji, Kizaru, and 2 others. The single pirate they expected was nowhere to be seen. Qingji pivoted as a squad of Marines thundered toward them. In a low voice he said, "Form a tight line, General." Lieutenant General Carrington stared at him, astonished. "That assassin just now, you didn't see him? He ran off." T-Dolphin exhaled a plume of tobacco smoke, cutting Carrington short. One by one, the Marines halted, their expressions shifting from confusion to utter disbelief. "They ran?" Major General Fletcher echoed, hardly believing his ears. "They actually retreated in the face of Qingji, Kiab, and T-Dolphin?" T-Dolphin leveled Fletcher with a cold glare, but refused to elaborate. With that, he turned on his heel and strode away. Tautu and the others followed in silence, their faces grim. The Marines watched them go, stunned into stillness. No matter how they replayed it in their minds, there was only one conclusion. The enemy had truly withdrawn. They had walked away under the noses of 4 of the fleet's most feared commanders. A few days later, the world government has just released its latest bounty updates. Nethin's wanted poster now reads 2 billion Baileys, an almost unimaginable sum, while Shi Liu of the Rain sits at 1.2 billion. Beyond those two, the rest saw little change. As soon as the new bounties went public, rumors about the clash on Flame Island spread like wildfire across the Grand Line. Almost no one knows what secret arrangement Nethin struck with the world government, or why he showed up on that island in the first place. What everyone does know is this: he was ambushed by 2 Navy admirals, backed up by 2 admiral candidates, and still managed to fight his way out. Facing 4 top-tier opponents, Nethin, nicknamed the Ghost Hand, shattered their siege alone and slipped away. When fleet commanders and pirate captains alike heard the tale, they shook their heads in disbelief. It sounded like pure fantasy. Yet, facts are stubborn. No matter how incredible the story seems, the evidence is undeniable. No one knows exactly how the battle unfolded or how Nethin slipped away. Yet from that day on, alongside the undead beast Kaido and the world's strongest man, Whitebeard, a new face loomed over the seas: Ghost Hand Rhodes, a fearsome monster able to stand his ground calmly even against the 4 admirals. Chapter 275, Sticky Fruit, Part 3. Failure. How could the Navy's encirclement have fallen apart? In the Holy Land of Marigoa, the 5 elders sat in grim silence as word of the fleet's defeat came in. At first, they bristled with anger, ready to lay blame on Qingji and his detachment. But as they pored over the full report, they realized the truth. There was no fault on Qingji's part. The real enemy was a twisted devil fruit that bent space itself, an ability so advanced that none of them had ever heard of its like. Wu Lao Xing, the highest-ranked swordsman among them, pressed his hand to his temple against the dull ache. If they wield spatial powers, he muttered, the only counters are either another space-bending ability or achieving ultimate sword mastery, what we call armed arrogance. And yet there was one bright spot. Peach Rabbit's swordsmanship had taken a dramatic leap forward. Tautu's raw strength now rivaled Qingji's, and with her newly honed blade technique, she was as capable as any admiral. In all of history, no woman had ever claimed such preeminence among swordsmen. The realization left the 5 elders both awed and uneasy. If Peach Rabbit could rise so quickly, what limits might their adversary's powers now have? Tautu undoubtedly still offers some hope, but how are they to deal with the Ghost Hand pirates? One of the 5 old stars steered the conversation right back to that pressing issue. Previously, they'd even discussed asking Nethin and the other 4 emperors to unite against their foes. But there was no denying it any longer. The Ghost Hand pirates had grown stronger than all 4 emperors combined. In the battles to come, the Ghost Hand would almost certainly prevail among the pirate crews, and that posed a serious threat. "Do we invite them in?" one old star asked. "Invite them? To do what?" Another replied, eyebrows raised. "If we're going to move against them, we must first inform Lord Yimu." As the 5 old stars continued to bicker, a government aide rapped sharply on the door and entered without waiting for an answer. "My lords," he panted, "there's a message, asked for by name, from the Ghost Hand pirates." At those words, the old stars exchanged uneasy glances. None of them answered at once. No one was eager to face that challenge. Finally, the last of the 5 cleared his throat and spoke in a low, steady tone. "Let him in. We'll hear what he has to say." Outside the door, government agents exchanged tense glances, then pushed inside and quietly planted a concealed transmitter on the low coffee table before the 5 old stars of the Don Quixote family. No sooner had they slipped out of sight than Lafitte's smooth voice crackled through the speaker they'd hidden. "Ho, ho, ho! How have you been lately? Such a shame your little siege failed. You escaped just fine, yet you still felt the need to flaunt your strength." The 5 old stars exchanged measured looks. One of them replied coolly, "Your remarks are noted, Lafitte. We bear you no anger." "Don't flatter yourselves," Lafitte purred. "You know I warned you. If you break our agreement, we won't hesitate to play dirty ourselves. and that means, well, toss aside any notion of fair play. A chill fell over the council. The Don Quixote elders shared uneasy glances, their premonitions suddenly dark. At last one of them, frowning, asked sharply, "And just what do you plan to do?" Lafitte's laughter echoed from the bugged device. "Imagine eating an apple and discarding only the core. We've handed you the sweet flesh. Now we're keeping the core for ourselves." He hung up, and in the sudden silence the assembled 5 old stars heard a faint, unsettling squirm. All eyes turned to the slim silver plate before Lafitte. Upon it lay a tiny piece of writhing flesh. "That," Lafitte drawled, "is a bit of heart tissue, courtesy of our last encounter." With that, the room fell deathly quiet. The message was clear. The Don Quixote family had been warned. Nethin stood over the gleaming stainless steel table, his gloved fingers steady, as he tested the power of his surgical fruit ability. He had split the heart open, removed a slim sliver from its core, and rejoined the 2 halves so that on the outside it looked completely intact. Visually it was perfect, but seeing wasn't enough. Lafitte leaned in, curiosity etched on his face. He picked up the repaired organ and pressed gently. "Let's see if your handiwork holds. Pat!" The flesh gave way under his fingers, the fragile repair coming apart in a splash of blood. Nethin's jaw tightened. So much for perfect. Half a world away, in the heart of their hidden base, Wu Laoxing watched his covert listening device click off. He stiffened. Something was very wrong. No sooner had the line gone dead than his pocket buzzed violently, an emergency call overriding every other channel. A 5-star bodyguard by rank, Wu Laoxing, known among friends and foes alike as Don Quixote, clamped the bug in his palm and pressed it to his ear. As the distorted voice on the other end delivered its grim report, the 4 men gathered around him went deathly pale. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. Then Wu Laoxing slammed his hand down on the low coffee table between them. Glass spiderwebbed across its surface, shards raining onto the carpet below. "Damn bastard!" he snarled, eyes blazing. Far to the south, in the turbulent waters of the New World, 2 massive ships sailed side by side. Their white sails billowed in the steady breeze, the wooden hulls carving clean lines through the rolling swells. Somewhere between those decks, new orders awaited, and with them, the next move in a game that would shape the fate of every soul involved. One of the 2 flagships served as home to Nethin, Robin, and the rest of their crew, along with Cadre Helding and the twin giants known as the Gores brothers, whom the captain had personally appointed to special cadre status. The second flagship carried the bulk of the giant contingent, led by Gold Bagu and others. Beyond those 2 vessels, every ghost hand pirate of rank, Shilyu of the Rain among them, and the giant commander Hireding counted as official cadre. Sugar and Geertz, though technically crew, were likewise treated as special cadre, for Sugar's child fruit and Geertz's healing fruit yielded powers so extraordinary they demanded constant protection. All other giants remained ordinary crewmen. In recognition of their loyalty and prowess, the Gores brothers and Gold Bagu, who had originally served under the captain, were each assigned code names like Sand Giant, elevating their standing above the other giants. That afternoon, in a secluded hold aboard the first flagship, Nethin reached into his pocket and produced a devil fruit glowing faintly with verdant, swirling energy. With a quick flick of his wrist, he sent it skidding across the wooden deck toward Robin. "Catch!" Robin's hand shot out, and he cradled the fruit gently. His dark pupils darted over its smooth skin as a sudden thought seemed to strike him. This was no ordinary devil fruit. "Interesting," Robin murmured, turning it over in his hands. Nethin raised an eyebrow in surprise. "What is it?" Robin met his gaze, a spark of curiosity in his eyes. "I'm not entirely sure, but I'm willing to find out." If his memory served him, the fruit's pattern looked genuine. Unless the government had slipped him a fake? Robin frowned, choosing her words carefully. "This one's called the adhesion fruit. Experts can't quite agree where it belongs. Some say it's a special paramecia. Others lump it in with the natural types." Nethin's lip twitched at the name. He knew the adhesion fruit all too well. It had once been in the hands of Torapol, a top officer of the Don Quixote family, and a snot-nosed brat who'd always rubbed him the wrong way. The fruit let its user transform their body into a sticky, malleable substance, not unlike Katakuri's mochi fruit. Nethin had no real desire for it. After Torapol's death, he deliberately kept Kaku and the others blind to its existence. He'd never ended to claim it himself. Now, somehow, the adhesion fruit was in the government's possession, tucked away in some backroom deal. Robin studied him and asked, "Is something wrong?" Noting his cool disinterest, she sounded puzzled. "Nothing," Nithin said, shaking his head as he regained his composure. "Just thinking." Nithin studied the devil fruit before him. On first sight, its twisted, lumpy surface was almost repulsive, yet he knew that taste and tolerance varied widely from person to person. Torapol, his comrade, actually preferred its grotesque appearance, though he could, at will, restore the fruit to a more ordinary shape. What truly mattered, of course, was the fruit's power. Its essence behaved much like a living adhesive, utterly controllable, astonishingly sticky, and able to bond to anything it touched. But that wasn't all. If the infused material encountered fire, it detonated in a fierce explosion, capable of unleashing devastating damage in an instant. For the giant core, this kind of limited-use devil fruit was a perfect fit. It filled a gap in their arsenal, promising the right blend of utility and raw destructive force to push their team's capabilities to a whole new level. Nithin finally awarded the slimy fruit to Yura, the giant's elite warrior. Slime giant sounded too crude, so he dubbed Yura the biochemical giant, a fitting title for anyone whose very body now exudes potent, corrosive ooze. With Yura's new powers, their odds of defeating the Big Mom pirates rose dramatically, but victory was far from assured. The Big Mom pirates were anything but ordinary. Their officers were divided into 4-star rank tiers, from 4-star up to 1-star, each level more formidable than the last. Even a 4-star commander could, in single combat, hold his own against the likes of Shiryu of the Rain, Fisherman, or Helding, and still outclass any opponent below that rank. And above them all stood Chief Longbread, Big Mom's first lieutenant and keeper of her deepest secrets. With a single strike of his candy-hardened staff, he could reduce a fortress the size of a town to a confectionery ruin. Even their weakest fighters boasted strength on par with seasoned generals. Faced with such enemies, Nithin knew that every advantage would count in the battles to come. Nithin studied the battlefield layout one last time. Each of the 4 emperors has a signature advantage, he began. Whitebeard's raw, overwhelming strength, Kaido's near immortality. Big Mom's pirates rely on sheer numbers and size. That last factor, Big Mom's fleet, doesn't need an elaborate countermeasure. If we end this fight swiftly, the only real threats are Kaido himself or a world government intervention. Lafitte tilted his head. But Captain, you warned us. What if Big Mom has a hidden lieutenant whose power rivals one of her 3 sweet commanders? That could swing the battle in her favor. Nithin nodded. Exactly. So here's our plan. Shiryu of the Rain will engage the 3 highest-ranked sweet commanders and keep them occupied. Trafalgar Law will neutralize their lower-ranked officers long enough for us to strike. Meanwhile, our heavy hitters will take on the Gigant Corps and Robin, one of Big Mom's most dangerous assets. Lafitte tapped his chin thoughtfully. If those pairings hold, we should systematically dismantle the entire crew. But, Nithin added, if Big Mom really does have another ace up her sleeve, a 4th star among those commanders, then all our calculations could fall apart. Silence settled over the War Council. They'd prepared for every known variable. Yet the possibility of an unknown enemy commander loomed large and posed a threat they couldn't afford to underestimate. Nithin leaned forward, studying Luo's face. So you've completed the mind exchange on the CP0 sub-captain, he said. You slipped a loyal Skypian's soul into his body. Problem is, even at full power, the sub-captain could only hold his own against Jiang Xing for a short time. A Skypian can't tap into the body's full potential. He's already 20 to 30% weaker than a star general. In a straight fight, he'd be crushed. Luo nodded. Nithin's expression remained calm, almost clinical. Then we kill a star general first, he decided. Sure, it's a bit underhanded to ambush one of Big Mom's lieutenants, but if we strike before they even know we're here, excluding Katakuri, who can glimpse the immediate future, every other general will be so badly wounded they won't be able to fight back. We might not even need to finish them in one blow to render them useless. A raid? Murmured Lafitte. Rain Shiryu shifted in his seat. The fishman assassin's eyes glittered. None of them were saints. Surprise attacks were well within their wheelhouse. Even the giants, who ordinarily prized fair combat, remembered what their elder Yorulu had taught them. Big Mom was no mere mortal. She was a demon in human guise. Demons didn't deserve mercy or honor. However, just as Nethan was about to make his decision, Robin's earpiece buzzed. Without changing her expression, she rose and stepped out into the hallway. A moment later she returned, folding her arms. "I've patched through Kaku," she said quietly. "He's got news on the person you asked about." At her words, Nathan's yes sparkled. He'd been searching for someone whose very presence could tip the balance of power in the Ghost Hand Pirate's favor. Someone with raw strength, someone he'd once been close to. Robin tilted her head. "He says you'll find him waiting on Greenport's east dock. Go at once if you want him before the Navy does." Nathan nodded. "Understood." He cast a thoughtful glance around the dimly lit war room. "That man? He'll raise our crew's reputation overnight." Robin raised an eyebrow. "You still think it's worth it? He's difficult." Nathan clenched his fist, determination shining on his face. "Isho is nothing if not strong. I've seen him single-handedly hold off 2 Marines at once. Even Shiryu of the Rain, now almost as high-ranking as an admiral, struggled against him." Robin gave a faint smile. Back then, he didn't go by Fujitora. He hadn't joined the Navy, and the world didn't know him as a blind justice. Just Isho. He's formidable, and despite being a pirate, he has his own code. Nathan exhaled. "That's exactly why I need him. I'm not one for noble causes, but he believes in something. Let him carry our flag of justice. I'll handle the rest." With that, Nathan strode for the exit, every step echoing his resolve. Robin watched him go, knowing full well that allying with Isho would change everything. Nathan paced the deck, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The Ghost Hand Pirates had the name of outlaws, but Nathan's true ambition wasn't to become one of the 4 emperors or even the Pirate King. He aimed higher, to overthrow the world government and forge a new order. For that, he needed more than brute strength. He needed allies of unwavering principle. Fighters as powerful as admirals, men of true justice, untempted by excess, always capable of finding their way, and unswayed by mere beauty. Such a man would prove invaluable to their cause. Robin stepped forward, parchment in hand. "Admiral Fujitora has been spotted," she announced. "Not in the New World, but in the latter part of the first half of the Grand Line, about half a hemisphere from here." Rhodes and Lafitte unrolled the navigational charts on the table. With swift fingers, Rhodes traced a winding route through the islands. "Here, and then onto this cluster," he said. "That's where he's been seen." Robin glanced up at Nathan. "Shall we pursue him?" Nathan stood silent for a moment, weighing the risks. Through scattered contacts, they'd pieced together enough of Fujitora's reputation, his unwavering sense of justice, his disdain for tyranny, to be cautiously optimistic. On their own, they estimated a 30 to 40% chance of persuading him to join. But there was another factor. Word was that a massive confrontation with the Big Mom pirates was brewing. If Fujitora learned that they intended to strike at another symbol of oppressive power, their odds of recruiting him soared past 70%. He nodded firmly. "He's worth the voyage. Prepare the 1,000 hand. We set sail at dawn." Below decks, the crew stirred with excitement. Their next destination lay still beyond the horizon, but with Fujitora on their side, the scales of justice might finally tip in their favor. Once Fujitora throws in his lot with us, toppling the Big Mom pirates will be child's play, and Nathan will finally claim a proper territory of his own. No more aimless cruising the seas. With that in mind, Rhodes bowed, issued his orders, and slipped out of the command hall. Nathan lingered for a heartbeat, that half-smile playing on his lips. In the corner, Shiryu of the Rain struck a match, brought the flame to his cigar, and drew deeply. The smoke curled around him like a dark cloak. Rhodes hadn't shared every scrap of intelligence about Fujitora, this so-called One-Eye, but anyone could see the man's power was extraordinary. "Ho, ho, ho," Shiryu chuckled through the smoke. "I crossed paths with him once, long ago. You never forget an opponent like that." Lafitte, propped against the wall, nodded thoughtfully. "My meeting with him was years back. He's held back, until now. I'm curious how much he's grown." Shiryu's grin widened. "Enough to earn Nathan's personal invitation. You don't volunteer for this kind of alliance unless you're on a level with the 3 disasters." At a low table, fisherman sat cross-legged, brow furrowed. He's bringing in so many heavyweights, the headlines will write themselves. I just hope we've got the muscle to back up this grand parade. They were, after all, the 5 emperors of the New World. With Fujitora's might joining their ranks, nothing, not even the mighty Big Mom pirates, stood a chance against them. Nethan frowned. Not everyone can pull off that kind of arrogance. If you're stronger than him, or stronger than Shiryu of the Rain, you can afford to speak so boldly. But if you're weaker, you'd better swallow your pride. That smug grin and the unfamiliar name behind it meant nothing to me. I decided to wait and see what he was really capable of. Shiryu of the Rain exhaled a lazy plume of smoke, flicked the ash from his cigarette, and strolled out of the hall. Chapter 277, A Sharp Mind. Somewhere along the Grand Line, on a windswept island, a small noodle shop catered to weary travelers. Inside, a blindfolded man sat serenely on a wooden bench, slurping the last of his broth. He wore a flowing purple cloak, cinched with a simple black sash, and his feet were shod in plain wooden sandals. A sturdy cane leaned against the bench beside him. His posture was unremarkable, yet there was an undeniable dignity in the way he held himself. Though the world had not yet felt the full force of his future deeds, there could be no doubt who he was. The man destined to become Admiral Fujitora. In just a few years, he would volunteer for the world draft and then rise to the rank of fleet admiral, shaping the course of naval history. Even now, a faint smile tugged at his lips as he reflected on how close he was to the 18th year of the Great Pirate Era. Ace had set sail in the 19th year, and Luffy would not follow until the 22nd, events yet to unfold. With a final satisfied breath, Fujitora set down his empty bowl, leaving only the faint sheen of soup on its sides. He rose, retrieved a folded banknote from his pocket, and fumbled briefly to confirm its value. Nodding to himself, he extended it toward the shopkeeper. "Thank you for the meal," he said quietly, his blindfold shifting but never revealing his gaze. Then, without waiting for change, he picked up his cane and strode out into the bustling street, already lost in thought about the tides of fate yet to come. Nathan slid the last few coins across the counter, and the shopkeeper grinned as he pushed them back toward him. "Take care on your way home," he said. Nathan, who'd become a regular at this little noodle shop over the past 10 days, returned the smile, tucked the change into his pocket, and reached for his wooden cane. He eased himself out of his seat, feeling for the threshold with his cane's tip, then began his slow, steady walk down the dimly lit street. At first, everything was quiet. Lanterns swung in the breeze, distant laughter drifted from a tavern around the corner. Then, as he turned into a narrower lane, shadowy figures slipped from both sides, forming a loose circle around him. A dozen men, leaning against walls and doorframes, blocked every exit. Nathan's heartbeat stayed even. He kept one gloved hand on his cane and took a single step forward. The cane's tip tapped against rough cobblestones until it finally struck a man's foot. Nathan bent slightly and placed a gentle hand on the man's shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said in a calm voice. "I'm blind. Would you mind stepping aside?" The man laughed, his lips curled into a cruel grin. As he sidestepped, he swung his boot at Nathan's leg. But Nathan didn't stagger. With unhurried composure, he lifted his cane, pivoted, and simply continued on his way, as if nothing had happened, straight into the heart of the ambush. A burly man paused, momentarily surprised by Nathan's calm composure. Then, with a broad grin, he reached out, grabbed Nathan's shoulders, and gave him a hearty slap on the back. "Hey, if I'm not mistaken, you've been raking it in at the casino this month, right? Nice streak you've got there." Nathan, blind though he was, touched the back of his head and offered a small, wry smile. "Yeah, I've been lucky," he replied evenly, unfazed by the stranger's forwardness. Around them, a dozen or so men with hard faces exchanged silent glances. They didn't pick fights on a whim. Some quick questions had led them straight to Nathan. In their eyes, a blind man was harmless, and a lone stranger flush with winnings was nothing but easy prey, a fat sheep waiting to be fleeced. They closed in, eyes glinting with expectation. "How about you show us some of that magic luck up close?" one of them jeered as he stepped forward. Nathan's expression stayed serene. He understood exactly what they were after, but if they thought a calm, blind guy was an easy mark, They were about to learn otherwise. Nethin's grip loosened on Admiral Fujitora's strength holders as he stepped back, a smug smile playing on his lips. Then, with sudden force, he seized Fujitora's collar in one hand and produced a handful of coins in the other. "Looks like fortune's still smiling on me," Nethin taunted. "A broken leg would be a real pain, literally. How about you pay me a little Bailey to keep this one intact?" He slapped the coins against his palm for emphasis. Beside him, his companion chuckled and unsheathed a saber with an exaggerated clang, deliberately letting the metal ring out so Fujitora could hear. Fujitora's face remained impassive, but his head dipped slightly. He thought, there are far too many greedy, despicable people in this world. Before anyone could react, a strange, palpable force rippled through the air. In the blink of an eye, the young man clutching Fujitora's collar found himself pinned in place. It was as if gravity itself had doubled its weight on him. Each breath grew more labored. His bones felt as though they were about to snap. A series of sharp cracks sounded beneath his boots. Panicked, he tried to wrench himself free, but the invisible pressure only intensified. The earth beneath him fractured, fissures spider-webbing outward as he was driven to his knees, then onto his face. He gasped, "Can't move." Fallen, crushed by the inexplicable force, his eyes widened in terror. Fujitora stood silently, gathering himself before the stunned onlookers. The only sound was the fading echo of the man's desperate struggle and the Admiral's unshakable calm. More than a dozen men surrounded him, none sensing anything amiss. When their companion suddenly crumpled to the ground, they assumed he was just joking around with Nethin. It wasn't until blood trickled from the man's mouth that they realized something was very wrong. "Hey, Kato! What's the matter? Knock it off!" one of them shouted, laughter still tinged with worry. At those words, their faces drained of color, and they drew their weapons in unison. "What did you do?" another demanded, leveling a steely glare at Nethin. Nethin said nothing. He leaned on his wooden staff, tapped its tip once against the cobblestones, then stepped forward and passed over the fallen assassin as though walking through a puddle. A stunned hush fell over the group. One of the men's eyes narrowed, fury igniting in his gaze. Without warning, he raised a musket and fired point-blank at Nethin's head. The blast echoed like thunder. A single bullet streaked toward him, but just as it closed to within a foot of Nethin, its speed plummeted, as if an unseen barrier held it back. The projectile clattered to the ground, spent and harmless. Silence reigned. Even the wind seemed to pause, leaving the men to stare in disbelief at the unruffled figure before them. Fujitora came to an abrupt halt. He knelt and picked up the wooden staff, gripping one end as if expecting it to spring to life. What is going on here? What did that man do?" he muttered under his breath. All around him, eyes widened in disbelief as the bullet, hovering unnaturally midair, finally dropped to the ground with a dull thud. Beads of sweat formed on foreheads, and hearts pounded in everyone's chests. They exchanged uncertain glances, caught between charging forward and fleeing. Then, from down the stone-paved street, came the unmistakable clatter of wooden sandals. Clack, clack, clack. The sound grew steadily louder. At the far end of the lane, a lone figure emerged, shrouded in a black cloak that swept around his ankles. His robes were neat, though his face, handsome in a simple, unassuming way, bore no trace of arrogance. Nethin stepped forward at a measured pace. He cast a cool, assessing glance at the would-be assassins slumped on the ground, then surveyed the dozen or so armed men, swords drawn, pistols leveled, who encircled him. A faint, confident smile curved his lips. "You've run out of time," he said softly. At his words, the tension rippled through the onlookers. Their grips tightened on hilts, their breaths came quick. A cold sweat beaded along their tem. "Plez." One of the men's faces went ashen. He stammered, "You're—" Nethin simply let his smile deepen, and the street fell into a charged, expectant hush. Nethin's face went deathly pale, horror etched into every line. Even Fujitora, who had just halted the bullet in midair, hadn't looked this shaken. Cold sweat beaded on Nethin's brow, and a chill ran straight down his spine. Those standing nearby reacted a heartbeat too late. When they finally grasped what they'd witnessed, their faces drained of color, and a collective gasp echoed through the crowd. A cold tremor seized their legs, and many crumpled to their knees. Ghost hand," someone stammered, voice trembling so violently they collapsed entirely. The name rippled through the stunned onlookers. The Great Path's fifth emperor. Whisper followed whisper, awe and terror warring on every lip as they stared at Nethan, once just a man, now the living legend revealed. Chapter 278, Surgery, Part 2. Fujitora came to an abrupt halt, unfazed by the dozen assassins closing in on him. He lifted his head toward the direction from which Nethan had emerged, and his eyes, blank, milky orbs without pupils, fixed on his old foe. A long silence stretched between them. Nethan stepped forward, closing the distance until he stood roughly 3 meters away and offered a faint, knowing smile. It's been a while. The last time they met, he'd been nothing more than a desperate pirate supernova, running for his life and nearly wiped out by Qingji's onslaught. Now he stood as one of the 5 emperors of the New World, his mere presence commanding the Grand Line. He didn't need a flashy display or any grandiose gesture. His quiet confidence was enough to make even seasoned warriors hesitate. Slowly, Fujitora lowered his wooden staff and returned Nethan's smile with an unexpected warmth. Nethan chuckled softly. In this world, who can truly avoid all the filth and corruption? Even if you shut your eyes, you'll still run into it sooner or later. Staying completely clean, that's a luxury none of us can afford. Everyone around fell silent as they overheard the exchange between Nethan and Admiral Fujitora. More than a dozen onlookers pressed close, but as soon as they realized the 2 men didn't even acknowledge their presence, a fresh wave of dread washed over them. A blind admiral calmly conversing with Nethan's phantom hand? It was like watching a ghostly scene. Fujitora was supposed to be just an ordinary blind man. Paralyzed, they all stood rooted to the spot. A few fought the urge to bolt, but their legs felt as heavy as lead. They might as well have been statues, forced to witness Nethan and Fujitora's private dialogue with utter helplessness. At Nethan's words, Fujitora let out a low sigh. "You're right," he admitted. "In this era of great pirates, there's simply no avoiding the turmoil. Every sea teems with rogues and cutthroats. The world government and navy can enforce order only within limited borders. Beyond that, chaos rules." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "If we continue to posture as if we uphold some distant authority, we'll only fan the flames of disorder." Fujitora's tone grew softer. "Ever since we met on the island of lawlessness, I've kept a close eye on you, Nethan. Your actions matter more than you know." Nethan didn't have to ask. Everything he needed to know was in the papers. They'd chronicled his history, the hardships that drove him to piracy, every daring exploit along the way. He wasn't reckless, as he appeared. Behind that open, honest face lay a mind as clear and precise as glass. And now Nethan had come here of his own accord. It couldn't be mere coincidence. His reputation carried too much weight. If fate hadn't led him here, then Rhodes himself must be maneuvering events. Fujitora, perched on the edge of a ruined rampart, watched him quietly, leaning on his wooden staff. "The world government," Fujitora began, his voice low. "Do you see them as gods?" Nethan offered him a faint smile instead of an answer. The admiral's grip tightened on his cane, knuckles whitening. Finally, Nethan met Fujitora's gaze. "They are no gods," he said softly. "Only rulers. Rulers who preside over a world that's grown ill, and their cure is worse than the disease. They patch things up with one hand while they poison it with the other. Piece by piece, their so-called medicine only lets the sickness grow deeper." "If we're going to cure this," Nethan said evenly, "there's only one option, a full surgical operation. We have to remove every last lesion at its root." Fujitora's gaze sharpened as he absorbed Nethan's words. The conviction behind them stirred something in him, and after a long, silent moment, he spoke with solemn gravity. "Your Excellency, the world government exists to preserve stability and order. Have you truly considered how much blood will be shed once the operation begins?" Nethan nodded. "I understand the risks, but surgery isn't an instant fix. First, ease preparatory treatment. Medicating the patient, administering anesthesia, thoroughly sterilizing the area. Only after all that can we safely proceed with the scalpel." Fujitora fell silent again, weighing the proposal. He recalled Rhodes's warning. He could no longer stand by as a mere bystander. With his own ambitions and beliefs driving him, he needed to decide which path to follow. Pirates were out of the question. They were the very essence of chaos. That left only 2 choices. Join the revolutionary army or remain with the world government. Fujitora stood at the prow of his flagship, the salty wind whipping across his face as he watched the gray dawn break over the open sea. Everywhere he turned, upheaval was in the air. The revolutionary army was no longer content to whisper seditious slogans in back-alley taverns. They were openly challenging the world government, fanning the flames of rebellion on every island from North Blue to East Blue. Their ideal of freedom rang out like a clarion call, but Fujitora knew all too well the cost. Revolutions demand blood, and every drop spilled reshapes the world in ways no one can fully predict. Not long ago, he had grappled with a choice that split his loyalties between the revolutionaries and the world government's navy, a choice that, under the weight of duty, he resolved in favor of the navy. Upholding order, he told himself, was the only way to protect the innocent. Yet now, a third path had emerged, one as unexpected as it was unnerving: the Ghost Hand Pirates. Their name betrayed them, pirates. And yet this crew did not prey on townsfolk or cargo ships. They hunted corruption, striking first and asking questions later, tearing the scabs off the wounds the government insisted on hiding. Each raid exposed more of the rot beneath the world government's gilded veneer. Fujitora recalled the man who led them, Nethan. Once known only as a shadow in the underworld, he had transformed into one of the 5 emperors of the sea. Even more astonishing had been Nethan's confidence, the way he'd laid out his grand design with steady eyes. Step 1. Eliminate the 4 emperors. Step 2. Bring the sword down on the world government. Step 3. Forge a new order in the ashes of the old. It was audacious, almost reckless, and yet he spoke as though he'd already won. Why would a so-called pirate entrust such a plan to a nobody like Nethan? Fujitora didn't have the answer. What he did know was this: the importance Nethan placed on him, on Fujitora, could not be ignored. Now the admiral weighed his options once more: remain loyal to the navy, clinging to the stability it claimed to preserve, throw in his lot with the revolution, hoping their ideals could truly bring peace, or walk the razor's edge beside the ghost hand, seizing the chance to upend the entire world order. The sea stretched endlessly before him, its surface calm only in appearance. Beneath, unseen currents roiled, and Fujitora understood that whichever direction he chose today would ripple through every shore and system in existence. He drew a slow breath, folded his hands behind his back, and stared at the horizon. The world government's banner, the revolutionary standard, the ghost hand's black flag, 3 choices fluttered in his mind like restless spirits. No one could predict which would rise to rule and which would drown with the old regime. But Fujitora, blind swordsman and admiral, was resolved to see the dawn of a new era, one way or another. Fujitora stood with his usual air of serene confidence, his violet eyes uncannily clear of any doubt. Nethan studied him for a long moment, then offered quietly, "Why not throw in your lot with the Navy? You've never made a firm choice, and you've always hated being a disposable pawn. Show them your true strength right away. Let the world government have no choice but to fast-track you straight to Admiral." At that, the more than a dozen assassins clustered around them all but froze in place. Beads of sweat trickled down their temples. Not one dared to shift or murmur a word. A few among them had quick minds and could see where Nethan's suggestion was leading, an alliance with one of the world's most powerful factions, but none dared to imagine it aloud. They had stalked what they thought was a rich, unguarded prize. Instead, they'd blundered right into the orbit of the Yonko. Some of the killers bit their lips, stifling panicked whimpers. This was supposed to be an easy score. They weren't cut out for battles of emperors. Nethan let the tension hang in the air for another beat, then met Fujitora's gaze. "I won't be able to pull this off by myself," he said evenly. "I need your help." Fujitora's impeccably composed face betrayed nothing at first, but after a few seconds he inclined his head politely. "Your proposal is generous," he murmured, "but I am merely a stranger without title or allegiance. I have no right to claim your honor or your cause." With that, he stepped back and turned away. Nethan's expression didn't flicker. He simply watched Fujitora go, then gave a single nod to his remaining subordinates. The assassins steeled themselves. There was work to be done, with or without the Admiral's sword. Nethan had already guessed how Fujitora would react. He met the Admiral's widening eyes with cool composure. "I trust my vision," he said softly. Then, leaning in close, he added something in a low voice that made Fujitora's jaw drop. "Really?" Fujitora gasped, the surprise plain on his face. Nethan merely smiled and looked back at him, saying nothing more. For a long moment, Fujitora stared at Nethan in silence, his grip on the wooden staff tightening so hard that his knuckles turned white. After letting the tension hang between them, Nethan finally spoke again. "How about a little wager? You remember our last agreement. I think it's time for a rematch. What do you say?" Fujitora bowed his head, as though sorting through a storm of thoughts. Then he lifted his gaze, resolved. Without hesitation, he inclined his head in agreement. Nethan's smile widened. "You should be honored." Chapter 279, Fujitora Boards the Ship, Part 3. Nethan tapped his chin, pondering for a moment. "How do you want to wager this? Since you invited me, the choice is yours." Fujitora considered the question in silence. Nethan slipped a hand into his pocket and produced a single coin. Under the dim lantern light, he studied its worn surface. "I don't gamble often," he admitted. "I'm no good with complicated games. Let's keep it straightforward. What do you say to a simple coin toss?" Fujitora inclined his head. "That's perfect." A confident smile curved Nethan's lips as he held the coin between forefinger and thumb. "Heads or tails, your call." Fujitora paused only briefly before replying. "I'll choose heads." "Then I'll take tails," Nethan said softly. With a practiced flick, he sent the coin spinning high into the air. Both men's eyes locked onto its rapid rotation, following every twist and turn. Time seemed to stretch as the coin reached its apex, then began its descent. On the surface, it was a mere game of chance, but in the hands of these two powerful figures, nothing was truly left to fate. Each already sensed the outcome the instant the coin left Nethan's finger. Nethan flipped the coin one last time, sending it spinning through the air. He'd already guided its trajectory so it would land with the flower emblem facing up. "Humph," Admiral Fujitora murmured, his expression unmoved. He raised his wooden staff in a single fluid motion, and suddenly an unseen force sprang to life, enveloping the coin and shifting its arc. Calm and collected, Nethan let a ghost of a smile touch his lips. He flicked 2 fingers toward the coin, summoning a razor-thin slice of wind that struck the metal's rim. Instantly, the coin's rotation accelerated, its descent sharpening into a steeper dive. Fujitora's milky white eyes narrowed just a fraction as he brought the staff down before him. "Zizi." At that precise instant, Nethan's power flared. He unleashed his twisted gravity, clashing directly with the Admiral's draw. The coin screeched to a halt, reversed direction, and shot skyward in a blur. 2 opposing fields, one compressing gravity, the other warping it, collided above the empty street. Click, click. Almost without warning, the pavement between them began to fracture. Cracks fanned out like a spider's web, racing across the stone's invisible, shuddering lines. Nethan stumbled back a step, eyes wide as the ground splintered before him. He could feel reality itself straining under their powers. This is... His voice faltered, the words dying on his lips as the earth continued to shudder. Nethan and Admiral Fujitora squared off, their auras flaring and colliding in midair. The impact sent a tremor through the dozen or so would-be assassins nearby, freezing them in place. They stared, hearts pounding, as spiderweb cracks snaked across the pavement between the 2 opponents, slowly at first, widening with every heartbeat. There'd been no thunderous blast or blinding flash, but the raw power still spoke for itself. In their bones they felt it. Step any closer, and you'd be torn apart. A moment later, panic broke loose. One man, eyes wide with terror, forced himself free of Nethan's oppressive presence and bolted. Others followed, scrambling to put as much distance as they could between themselves and the 2 champions. They never made it. With a casual flick of his fingers, countering Fujitora's gravitational pull, Nethan unleashed a spiraling wave of force. It rolled down the street like a condensed shockwave, twisting the very air into coiling vortices. Every assassin caught in its path was crushed and contorted as though squeezed in an invisible vice. Not a single scream pierced the night. By the time the twisting pulse subsided, none of them could move. Nethan's power surged, crushing flesh and bone into a tight, blood-red sphere that tumbled down the street and vanished around the corner. Boom! The shockwave from his twisting technique collided with Fujitora's gravity field in a violent clash. Nethan was shoved off balance, and staggered back, while Fujitora, leaning on his wooden staff, felt his clogs skid across the ground for nearly 2 meters before coming to a halt. High above them, a single coin clinked to the pavement. It rolled twice, then settled with the image of a delicate petal facing up. Fujitora straightened, braced himself, and fixed Nethan with a steady gaze. Nethan returned the look coolly, a small, confident smile playing on his lips. Without another word, Fujitora walked directly up to him, stopped, and spoke softly. "From now on, this is yours." Nethan merely inclined his head in acknowledgement. There was no doubt he'd earned this victory. His strength, both physical and resolute, had proven superior. Fujitora had lost their final bet, and there was no reason to dispute the result. Nethan's claim was absolute. The Ghost Hand Pirate's ship lay moored against a lonely stretch of coast, its hull creaking softly in the ebbing tide. From a small cutter, Rhodes, Admiral Isho Fujitora of the Marines, Lieutenant Lafitte, and the archaeologist Nico Robin climbed ashore and made their way down the narrow gangplank. On the deck, Shiryu of the Rain, the sniper known as Fisherman, and the ship's doctor Trafalgaro stood waiting, their eyes immediately fixed on Fujitora. Even from this distance, Shiryu could sense an unusual aura emanating from the blindfolded admiral. Calm yet powerful, it was nothing like the strength of ordinary men. Shiryu had faced many foes, but he knew at once that Isho Fujitora was a warrior of the highest caliber, though exactly how formidable he could not yet tell. Still, if Rhodes had personally requested his company, it could only mean the Marine's skill was extraordinary. Nethan strode up the gangway next, reaching back to offer Robin his hand. She slipped her fingers into his with a small, relieved smile. Lafitte followed close behind, and finally Fujitora ascended at a leisurely pace, every step measured and confident. Once they were all on deck, Nethan turned and greeted Fujitora with a warm grin. "Captain Shiryu of the Rain, Sniper Fisherman, and our ship's doctor, Trafalgaro." He gestured toward each in turn. Shiryu gave a curt nod, Fisherman tipped his cap, and Trafalgaro inclined his head politely. Then Nethan shifted into a more formal tone. "Admiral Isho Fujitora, I am Nethan of the Ghost Hand Pirates. It's an honor to have you aboard." A hush fell over the assembled crew as they exchanged curious glances. Nethan cast one more look over his proud officers, Shiryu, Fisherman, and Trafalgaro, each already alert and ready. Together, they faced the new chapter that awaited with their extraordinary guest from the Marines. On the deck of the ship, Shiryu of the Rain regarded Admiral Fujitora with a calm, unreadable expression, neither hostile nor indifferent. Nearby, Fisherman clicked his tongue as he watched Fujitora, trying to measure the Admiral's true strength. Nethan, having just finished his introduction, stepped back and waited. Fujitora met Shiryu's gaze and offered a warm, genuine smile, one so gentle it seemed to reassure everyone around him, even the ship's restless animals. Clearing his throat, he said, "I've long admired your great deeds, Mr. Nethan. That you would speak so highly of me is truly humbling. I hope you'll bear with me as we move forward together." "He's awfully modest," someone murmured. Trafalgar Law, cradling his demon sword, spoke up. "If our captain thinks so highly of you, Fujitora, you must have extraordinary skills." Fisherman tilted his head. "Since we're all on the same ship now, we should get to know one another better. What exactly can you do?" Fujitora scratched the back of his head and let out a soft chuckle, his amiable, uncle-like grin spreading across his face. "Heh? The little trick of carving insects? Hardly worth mentioning." Shiryu of the Rain stepped forward, a smoldering cigar clenched between his teeth. In one hand he held the second-generation Guitoru horizontally before him, eyeing Fujitora as he spoke. "I'm bored," he rumbled. "My hand and DS are twitching for action. How about a little discussion?" Fujitora, though a late arrival on the ship, couldn't hover above everyone else simply by rank. Here, status was earned by strength, not by the order in which you set foot on deck. In this world, power dictated position, and the weak inevitably fell before the strong.